And what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the 150th episode of Loggin On the podcast. We got a very special episode for you guys, as always, with a very special guest. We are doing well, first off, let me introduce that very special guest. We got Kyle O'Brien here tonight. Very happy to have you here. And
happy to be here.
Awesome. And this was a podcast that has been talked about, like, kind of formed at Luke's wedding in that sense.
That's right.
And I'm glad that we're getting this done right now. It's awesome to see things come together and go through with it and everything like that. But yeah, we for the 150th episode, we are going to be talking about a form of entertainment content, also educational content for that matter as well, in whatever way you like to consume this content. Let's put it that way, right?
Absolutely.
And it's not movies, it's not TV shows, it's not even Broadway plays. This time we're talking about novels and books. That's right. First time ever, actually, on this podcast that we're talking about this. I would like to do a podcast one day, have you on, maybe have Miss English on as well, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we could do a top 5 best book to TV or movie adaptation.
That's a good one, yeah.
We haven't done that yet either, and I would love to do that one as well.
We'll have to do a bit of more homework on that, I think, to really think about it. And then there's also the list of what has not been adapted and would be nice to be.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So with that said, today we are doing our top 5 favorite novels and books, either or, whatever the case may be. Yeah. Put them both together. You know what? We're going to start with this question for you right now. Yeah. Because you're in this world of books and novels and whatnot, and we'll get into what you do in a second, the difference between a book and a novel. What is, like, the difference? What depicts them from both of those things? Because that's something I've always wondered. I always thought they were the same thing, but why make 2 different words for them?
Yeah, well, I would say, not having been in the industry I've been in for the last 4.5 years, novel you would tag to something that is a work of fiction, and then a book can be anything. I mean, I work on books of all different platforms and genres, mediums, color, not color, you name it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be, I think novels can be books, but books don't have to be novels.
Understood. Okay. I like that. Okay. Now I know. Now, Kyle, explain to me exactly what you do with your passion, whatnot. What is your passion, and how are you working your way through life with it?
Yeah. So, to be honest, so I had gone to art school post FTHS days.
Yes.
And studied graphic design, and kind of was introduced to so many different sorts of projects, and those sort of projects that would then lead to different kinds of careers within design, specifically, within the graphic design, mode. And so when I then got out of school, I was in an array of different things, from like marketing design, advertising design. And then when I truly feel like I fell into publishing. And that's where I now have been the last 4.5 years. I didn't anticipate it. A lot of my classmates, whether they were graphic design majors, illustration majors, etc., those that wanted to be in publishing and from the get-go in school talked about, I want to be in publishing. It was very children's book centric, and they wanted to be the children's book author, illustrator, you name it, the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I initially thought, I nothing against children's books and any of that, but that's not what I imagined myself doing. I had thought maybe I would go into more of a magazine editorial design route. And I did have an internship junior year with a magazine in the city. And that was all well and good. But then when I got down to this job a couple years out of school, I mean, it was kind of surprising to me that I had never thought that this sort of role would be necessary in the publishing industry. Because what I do, to explain to the audience and to you, Frank, I design for adult trade fiction and nonfiction hardcover books. And so the books that we would read in high school that were more adult-based, to books that you could pick up at Barnes & Noble these days, on the New York Times bestseller list, you name it, those have to be designed by someone.
Yeah.
And that's what I ended up doing, which, it kind of went off like a light bulb. Like, why did I never think that this could be a possible career for me? I had always been interested in typography, fonts, design, and layout, all that in school. And that's why I thought magazines at first. And then this, role came up on LinkedIn. I applied and then went through the whole interview process. And then I started. And because of that, now the publishing industry itself has opened my eyes to everything that encompasses the process of a book being made.
Sure.
It's a lot longer than, I think, if you look into things online between BookTube or on Bookstagram and I guess BookTok to a degree. It is a very long process from concept to execution. And all the different components in between, I would say, involve someone like me or any of my colleagues who are in different departments. And, but yeah, it's, I didn't anticipate being in the industry. I'm very happy to be in it because I enjoyed books, and it's definitely getting to be part of something that you're passionate about, I think is really, I have to take steps back occasionally and say, I'm doing something that when I talk to people about, I work in publishing, talk about what I do, a lot of people will say, oh, that's so cool. That's, so unique. And I do have to remind myself, like, it is really unique, the job I get to do and the experience I get from it, reading and working with these manuscripts several months in advance before the public can even touch the finished book.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, it grounds you at times. But I definitely, like, I would say there's a blessing in it, but there's been a lot of learning as well. And not just learning about the industry itself, but myself as a designer and as a worker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things I would like to bring out with what you just said, too. So, well, first off, it's amazing that, like, it's almost like you're going for one thing and then you find that other thing along the way, and it's like, oh, wait, this.
Exactly.
This I like a lot, like, and it's awesome when things come unexpectedly. That's number one. And the fact that you love it and everything, and you love the process of how it all works, learning the process of a book being published and getting worked on before it's published and everything like that. Incredible. You brought up a couple, I'm assuming websites or something like that, or groups or something like Book Talk and everything like that. What are those?
So there's, as we all know, social media in general has its upsides and its downsides.
Of course.
And so I would say you have BookTube, which is the bookish community on YouTube, Bookstagram, the bookish community in Instagram, and then BookTok, the bookish community in BookTok. In TikTok. I don't even have TikTok, to be honest.
I wasn't even thinking of TikTok. You know what I was thinking of?
What?
TED Talk. That's what I was thinking for a sec.
Talk to you, okay.
Talk, okay. Gotcha.
No. But, I mean, there is, how do I put it? There are positives to social media and the contribution they can have with books. It gets the word out there.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are books that get more elevation depending on, who's promoting it, then the next person talks about it, and it goes on and on like a chain reaction, and then these books will start to sell more. Yeah. Even if these books existed 5 years before. You have, for instance, I don't know if you've heard of the author Colleen Hoover.
No, I'm not sure.
So she has blown up. Her work is okay. I've read one of her books, but not my cup of tea. But there's a lot of people out there, in particular women, who really vibe with what she writes about.
Yeah.
And she blew up via TikTok and Instagram. And so then all of a sudden, these books she had published several years before were shooting up to like the New York Times paperback bestseller list.
Really?
So it's interesting. Well, as we know, the power of social media.
Yeah.
It's like the factor of, we had the news and now we live in an age of rolling news. Once you post this out there into the stratosphere of social media,
right,
and just this whole social being, we'll say, other people can see it. They can react to it. They can go out and read this and make their own opinions.
Yeah.
And so there is a positive to these different social media platforms. And there are people in those platforms who specifically have profiles based around books, and they can promote books. Sometimes publishers or booksellers, whomever, will reach out to these people, these influencers, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
Personalities, and ask them to rate and review this book.
Yeah.
And then that gets that word out to their community. And so there is a chain reaction that social media can add a positive to book selling. But it is interesting when you look at the lists, like the New York Times and any other bestseller lists, and you look and say, well, what are books are on the tops of the list, and is there a trend going on? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can trace it back to what people are talking about on social media.
Gotcha.
Just like with everything. What
of course.
What are people talking about on social media?
Yeah. Now, I think the social media, especially for books, right?
Yeah.
I think it should be bigger than ever right now. I think it should be. And my reason for saying that is because I just don't think a lot of people read nowadays. I think that's the main thing. So to hear that there are I assume that there was always communities and everything like online and whatnot talking about books and everything. But for something to basically go viral and have this author's work from in the past start blowing up because she's rising and everything like that, to me that's incredible. Sure, you said it wasn't your cup of tea, but it's getting people out there reading and whatnot too, no?
Absolutely. It's getting people are seeing it on their phones and they're saying, I gotta go out there and get this book. Or then you saw on your phone, you ignore it, then you see your friend talking about it, or they're reading it, or they're posting it, or your sister's cousin, whatever, whoever. And I think there's perhaps one of the only benefits from the pandemic was when people were initially locked in and they had to read.
Yeah.
And so that was tough because you watched everything on Netflix. Everyone watched Tiger King and whatever else was out
and
there.
Outer Banks.
And Outer Banks, on Amazon or
absolutely.
wherever. Normal People on Hulu, you name it.
And,
then people turned to books, which people hadn't for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And because that was, books are a form of escape. It doesn't matter if you don't have to go to Hogwarts or Narnia or Middle Earth. You can escape to somewhere like New York or Los Angeles or Paris.
Sure.
And it's still an escape from whatever is going on outside there.
Absolutely.
And so because of that pandemic boom of books, it brought some people to like a TikTok. TikTok was hitting off even further because of people were stuck inside making their TikTok videos.
TikTok became huge over that time.
Right. And so then you had this book talk community really formed even further because then you could go on there and see what's on the book talk, what's trending, what books, and you can make your own opinions whether you like those books or not if you read them or they seem like your cup of tea.
Yeah.
But that's another way to get it out there. And yeah, it is interesting how it all works out that, books, you would think they've been on the decline and that maybe audio or ebook is more on the upcline. But because of the pandemic at times, people have rushed to the bookstores and picked up in paperback, it's really interesting, especially for books, like I said, that existed 5 years ago, but this one book by the author hits off on TikTok and then you find out she's got 3 other books. I gotta go read them all.
Right.
And that's what happens.
So I'm starting to realize now that maybe that I definitely think that not the joy of reading them, but the joy of getting excited about for the majority of people, I feel like, in a sense.
Yeah.
It's not as much talked about when a new book is coming out, except for maybe like when the hell is George R.R. Martin writing that final book? You know what I'm saying? Like that anticipation for it and whatnot, right? Yeah. But I do believe like you hear it all the time and this, that, and all the other time, the silent majority, right? I do believe are reading books and whatnot. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe just because it's not trending online and you're not seeing it online, there are still plenty of people reading about and whatnot.
Yeah, when you entered like in my industry in publishing, people know when a certain book is coming out. I think we've had Sarah J. Maas, who's with Bloomsbury, I believe, in America, and then Kristen Hanna, I might be butchering that. They just recently put out books in the last month, and people, have pre-ordered, and pre-order sales are very important to the industry. It's very important to the publisher themselves as well as the author, because then you can take into account how many you need to print that you already were planning and then also having to sell out.
Yeah.
But then these, the word gets around, and then those book communities, the bookish communities who read them, they're going and pre-ordering. So like there can be an excitement, and that's great. But like you said, if it's not trending out there, like what some politicians doing or what's going on wherever, like a catastrophic event. Books obviously are not catastrophic events, so I'm not trying to compare them at all. I say that for legal reasons, and to not be canceled potentially one day. But within publishing, there's even decisions made. Will you publish a book when you know another author who seasonally, year after year, publishes around that time? Will you market your book and sell it on that same sale date as such and such?
Right.
And will you then run the risk if you're aiming to be number one, if your author in this book stands to be number one, Are you taking a gamble by putting it then? Sometimes decisions will be made to put books at certain times of the year to either benefit off the Christmas and holiday rush,
Sure.
and sometimes to get ahead of that or a little bit after.
Yeah. So if you come off on top, right, when, say, you decide to release your book along with another author who's very popular or whatever, and your book comes up on top, is it a risk? Absolutely to take. But if it does, I mean, it's an excellent feat.
Oh, absolutely. And we see it. There's been another author in recent time who started this new trilogy. It's fantasy sci-fi based. Iron Flame, I think, is the first book. I can't remember. And that came out of nowhere, but people were rushing to buy it once the word got out. And did it knock off some other known bestsellers from yesteryear? Yeah. This new author, was taking the first and second place spot on and off.
Wow.
And someone else who'd been in the industry a lot longer as an author, maybe they reached number 3, 4, and then slowly dipped down.
Yeah.
And that happens.
Of course.
Like anything, what's trending? What are people running out and getting?
Absolutely. You keep on bringing up the bestseller lists a lot, and I'm sure that at all publishing companies, like New York bestsellers and whatnot, I'm sure there's plenty of them. What's like the main quality or characteristic to have to make it onto one of those lists that most of these lists have in common? Like, obviously it's got to make a lot of money and whatnot, but is there a minimum amount that a book would have to make to at least reach on that list and then go higher if it could? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say very much it's based around the units sold. And so in particular, the list will break down at times between hardcover, combined hardcover, paper, and ebook, and then you have a separate for audio. But the units in particular are very important. So say you sold 15,000 hardcover books for that first week, and that could be a combination of pre-order sales. Say maybe there was 7,000, and then in the week after, another 7,000 or plus came through. You take that into account and use those metrics up against what else is on the list, what other sales have happened across the whole industry. And should your numbers be higher than someone who had been number 1 the week before, then there's that chance of taking that number 1 spot. I believe that's the exact metrics. It's based around a week-to-week ranking.
Oh.
But sometimes when you have so much, we'll say, invested in pre-order sales, that can really sustain, like a celebrity memoir. A lot of those will get 3 months in advance, buy my book, or the publisher say, buy such and such's book if they don't have a social media presence or whatever. That can also trigger the rankings, because if you have this built-in number, then it's going to be very hard for someone else to overtake.
Of course.
So it is interesting, and it's a tricky math, and there are times it's been questioned, but it's a thing I'm still 4+ years later still trying to understand, but I've got a better understanding than an outsider who would be like, well, how is it chosen?
Of course, that's what I wonder, because, well, the main reason why I asked that question is because there's a lot of books on that list. You see that golden badge on a book. Hardcover or soft cover, paper cover, whatever. There's a lot of them. And it makes me wonder sometimes, is this, not that it's not legitimate, right? But it's are they just giving this to everybody sort of deal? You know what I'm saying? That's how I feel.
I mean,
that's how I feel.
There are times that it's been questioned. There's a very known author who's still been writing years and years and has done combined books with other authors, with celebrities, you name it. They've done fiction, nonfiction. Don't know if they've done children's, but anyways, and they called into question the New York Times list a year ago or something. It was very interesting because they knew their units and they were looking up against other units that had made the list. So it's very interesting. How do you really, how do we know it's legitimate? How and numbers aren't always posted on the list, or I don't think to the general public they're not listed. I've seen numbers internally when they get released or they've been sent around in the company. But the general public, you go on the NewYorkTimesWebsite.com, and I believe it's by Thursday morning, you can see the list that would then appear in the Sunday paper. or in 2 Sundays' time. I can't remember specifically. But you're just seeing the name of the book, the author, and maybe a brief synopsis of what that story is. You're not seeing the actual number of their units sold.
Right.
So it can be tricky.
Yeah. I feel like that's like an instance of like, how I look at it, it's almost comparing it to like movie ratings on certain websites.
Yep.
Rotten Tomatoes just got caught they got paid by people to give their stuff like incredible reviews and everything like that.
Yep.
Same with IGN. I don't know if they've ever been caught, but speculated to give video games better reviews and maybe they really didn't deserve, or whatever the case may be. That's interesting to me. And how it updates week by week?
Yep.
It does. Okay. So, gotcha.
Being a publishing insider, for lack of better words, I can see the numbers on a Wednesday before they go live, typically. Yeah. And I believe probably other publishers do the same, especially because if an author does well, they want the editor to know so they can reach out and be like, hey, you made the list.
Yeah.
But it cannot be publicized till that evening. And then I believe either that evening or that next morning, like I said, is when you can go online and see the official ranking of it. And for the list, and then you can see the breakdown of the different categories.
And that honor, that badge that you'll see on the cover of a book, it can't go away.
Once
right?
you're a New York Times bestseller,
you are a New York Times bestseller.
So when it's your first book and it's in hardcover, and then if you don't have to reprint jackets, which then in that case, if you did, then they maybe might adjust it to say New York Times bestseller and then the author's name.
Author name. Do they do year too?
Not always. They don't usually. They just will write New York Times bestseller, #1 New York Times bestseller if you reach that level too. And then, but if they don't do that, which if they don't reprint jackets for whatever reason, if the book is not going to continuously sell hardcover for a year plus,
sure.
Then when they do the paperback edition, you can bet your butt that it's going to be on that paperback saying New York Times bestselling author such and such.
I don't blame them for that. It's going to sell more for that instance.
And then, like you asked, that person forevermore, whether they got it honorably or not, is a New York Times bestseller. Whether they're on the list for a week or a year, once you're on that list, you are technically a New York Times bestseller.
Wow, all right.
It's very interesting.
It is interesting. I always wondered it too. Mm-hmm. And it amplified my curiosity because I saw a TikTok the other day about the same thing I asked you or said to you. Like, there's a lot of them out there.
There is. Like my dad will say, "Oh, what books came out today?" And it's like, I couldn't tell you. And obviously he's speaking to my present publisher.
Right.
But sometimes I know more about other books I've heard that are coming out because it's out there in like on the online communities and whatnot. Yeah. And so people are talking about it. People know this is going to hit the list potentially. Is this going to knock such and such around? Yeah. But I also I try to keep tabs of my own books, like the ones that I become passionate about especially.
Yeah.
And devote a lot of time to, then I'm very aware of when they come out. And then, I occasionally, depending if I know it might hit the list, then I'm waiting around saying, oh, it's how to do, and
of course,
which can be exciting, and also
absolutely.
But then I also have to remind myself it's out of my control.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt.
But when it does happen, it's cool to be like, I was a little part of this.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep.
Awesome. Would you want to get into our top 5 list?
If you would like to, yep. If you've got no more questions at the moment, we could always.
At the moment, yes. Yeah. At the moment, yes.
Yes, and feel free as we go through to ask, any other questions.
100%, I will, for sure.
Great.
So, all right. So, how we usually do, me and Luke do the top 5 lists. Yep. We'll say whatever honorable mentions, usually all together. Like, I'll say all of my honorable mentions, and you'll say all of your honorables.
Okay.
And then, when it comes to the actual top 5, say I'll do 5-4, then you do 5-4, I'll do 3-2.
Okay.
You do 3-2, and then 1-1.
Okay.
Deal.
Okay.
And then, I don't know if you have any dishonorable mentions. I've only had that once before in an episode. I forgot what episode that was even for, but I'm just throwing it out there. It's you kind of have to really be passionate about that section of the list. I feel like if it's something that, you know what I'm saying?
Like, oh no, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not here to spread any hate on the podcast, but if you're passionate about something, then go ahead, speak on it. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I don't know about hate,
Well, not hate. No. But just don't favor. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I would. Yeah, I would say.
So I have 4 honorable mentions.
Okay.
Now, actually, I also need to preface this to you, which I actually slightly spoke to you through text before, and to the audience. My list is a little embarrassing in the sense that I don't read that much. So the books that I'm going to list off here are ones that are, I guess you would consider them children books, and I have very nice nostalgia, and I was very passionate about these books, and most of them are series too that I've read and really enjoyed, or they were books that we read in like high school and middle school and whatnot. So that shows you where my not like anticipation or enthusiasm for these things. I respect everyone that does read books. I think it's an amazing thing and whatnot, and it makes you smarter, all this sort of stuff. Makes your mind think. And I honestly want to get back into it, starting with a certain book series that is on my top 5. So, but I'll get into that a little bit later.
All right.
So, all right, let me bring up the honorable mentions. I'll go through them somewhat quickly here. So, first off, we got this is one that wasn't read in school, but it was a series that I just read on my own. The Spiderwick Chronicles.
Okay, I've heard about that, but I haven't read.
They actually just came out with the new TV series of it. I believe on Disney Plus or Hulu, something of that nature.
All right. Same parent company.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. I started reading these books because at least the book art cover looked very similar to, maybe I shouldn't say it right now, but another book series, I should say. Okay. All right. And it looked interesting. Didn't read all of them all together. And by the way, this is by 2 authors, Holly Black and Tony, I hope I don't butcher this, Terlizzi. I don't know if those names sound too familiar to you. Mm-hmm. I also found it interesting that it was 2 authors working on the same book. Is that like a regular thing that happens?
So is this a graphic novel or is it just a regular
novel? No, it's not a graphic novel by any means. Like the only art that's on there is just the book cover. Okay. You know what I mean?
No, it happens. Authors will pair up between adult fiction to young adult fiction.
Yeah.
They will come together, write, if it's a 2-person point of view book, and one author's writing one character's point of view, the other's writing the other. Sometimes they'll help each other out. Yeah. But they will designate, what I've always imagined, that they'll kind of designate one handles more of the one character, but then they also allow a little give and take too.
Right, right. So I'm very curious now how they work that out for this certain book series, because there's a lot of them. Yeah. There's I think a 4 or 5, unless they made more. Right. By the time like I started growing up and everything like that and stopped reading them and everything. But they had they also had a movie which I watched. It was okay. It was okay. And it's all about like this, I believe it was like a spyglass sort of deal where you could see like if people were creatures or not, like mystical creatures and everything like that. Okay. And it dealt with like goblins and gremlins and everything of that nature too.
Nice.
Pretty interesting. Would I say it was as interesting as other books that I fully read the series of? Unfortunately not. Yeah. But it was something that I always kept in my mind. And listen, they still make more media content of it, so it still has to be popular in that sense too,
Yep, it's selling somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We also got... I don't know if you or the audience would consider this a comic book, but it is like... They have I don't know about hardcover books for this, but they have the paper cover books.
Paperback, yeah.
Captain Underpants.
Okay. No, I mean, that would be, I wonder if we would consider that a middle grade book or a graphic novel. I'm not too sure.
Well, explain middle grade.
So which is nothing I hadn't realized until being in publishing. So middle grade would be something for, I guess, a middle school age. And I've read a couple since at my publisher. Like I've gotten books from there and said, this sounds interesting. And I've read some of them, and they can be deep. Yeah. And it's not the books that we were potentially required to read from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Sure. But it's very interesting how like the authors can hit a note. And something I've learned in publishing is within the whole children's genre, they're probably one of the hardest demographics, children in general, to impress upon with stories, because not saying a fantasy thing, oh, the child won't believe, they know it's not real. A story at its core, a child will relate to it or connect to it, and when they don't, they just don't bother with it. And it can be anything, doesn't have to, it could be any sort of topic. But Captain Underpants, I would say, because I guess I read that like elementary school time too.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's because I wouldn't say it's a children's picture book. So I wonder where that falls.
Yeah, right. That's a good thought to have, because definitely not children picture book.
No,
definitely not.
So,
but it was more like a goof on like a comic book,
absolutely,
in that sense. But it was a book. The other thing too, I'll even Captain Underpants, just from the title alone, completely ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. But I do have a little bit of a deep connection to it as well. Yep. I don't know if you remember. I don't even know if
I read them in like elementary school.
No, yeah. But like back in elementary school, right, when we were in the old West Freehold, I would write comics and whatnot, specifically Sonic the Hedgehog comics.
Yeah.
And I brought them into school one day. I don't know if you were part of the class or whatnot, or if you would remember. I brought them in, and everyone was reading them and everything like that.
Oh, I can't remember. Oh, that sounds really amazing, though.
Yeah, dude, it was awesome. It was cool. Mm-hmm. It was very nerve-wracking. But whatever. I did it anyway.
You were young, you were passionate.
Exactly. And I love doing it. I love drawing and everything like that, right? Yeah. So, you have the two kids, Harold and whatever the other kid's name was.
Right.
And they did the same thing I was doing. And that's where I related to it in that sense. And, I thought it was funny and everything. It was always cool to like put the three fingers here and start flipping the pages and whatnot in those certain sections of the books and everything like that. It, once again, the nostalgia factor.
Right.
And they actually made a movie maybe 4 or 5 years ago now of Captain and it was good.
Okay.
Like I didn't expect it to be, but it was good. Right. And I'm surprised with how well it did in the box office and critic reception, that they didn't make another one. But Kevin Hart voiced one of the guys too. Like,
really?
They got big people a part of it. But yeah, sorry if I keep on bringing up like movies and TV that it led to and everything like that. But all right.
You're allowed to. I'll probably bring it up with some of mine, I'm sure.
All right, here we go. Number 3 of honorable mentions out of 4, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. This was another book series. Not all of them I read, because I'm pretty sure they're still pumping out more. But by Jeff Kinney. Oh, and Captain Underpants was by Dave Pilkey, I believe his last name was.
I was reading something about him the other day in a newsletter. He's like, if it's him, I could have a wrong author, but I'm pretty sure it's him, because I think they wrote about him being of Captain Underpants fame.
Yeah.
He has like a bookstore in Massachusetts, I believe, and then he's just recently, and for legal reasons, don't quote me, but I think he purchased something, and it's going to be like another, like, this building's going to have like a beer hall, a coffee shop, a bookstore.
Really?
Yeah. And it's like somewhere in Massachusetts, not Boston. And I think it's Massachusetts, but it's interesting that, and this is a thing some authors buy into and the co-owners, or they are the owners of bookstores.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
There's a couple who I might bring up at times in my spiels that they are like store owners, independent bookstores.
Gotcha. That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And that idea with the beer hall and coffee shop and all this and all this stuff for a bookstore, that's incredible to me. I want to look that up now and see what's up with that.
I gotta double check. Yeah. But it was in as the newsletter is called, pun intended, I suppose. It's called Shelf Awareness.
I like it. It. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It was just funny to me. Yeah. I don't know. Didn't really like any of the movies or anything like that came out of it, but the one thing that they obviously were purposely going for, but I didn't appreciate it that much. And in fact, I thought it was somewhat lazy. And this is why it's an honorable mention, is the art style, because there were basically every page had some sort of illustration on it.
Okay.
And they're basically stick figures, black and white and everything like that. But like that's the only thing I found a little bit lazy, but whatever. Oh, my phone keeps on locking up on me. One last honorable mention. This is a more educated level, higher educated level book. World War Z by Max Brooks.
I didn't realize that was a book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It started off as a book, and it's a very interesting. It's the only book that I've read that was like this, where it's diaries from different people in each chapter. So it's a different story each chapter, but it's all dealing in the same world, either before, during, or after the zombie outbreak.
It's almost like short story collections that come together as a whole story.
Exactly. Yes. And it was very interesting to read because, especially for someone that doesn't have like the biggest attention span for say, right? Like, I think that one short story after another, it's like, okay, now we're learning something else about a different person and whatnot and everything like that. And I think that helps out a lot. Now, the movie with Brad Pitt,
yep.
which I also did very much enjoy. I very much enjoyed it. It has nothing to do with the book whatsoever.
When that happens,
right. Like, nothing to do. Like, it's not the movie's not following different stories of people and whatnot. It's following Brad Pitt.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
They were trying to sell.
Yes, right, exactly. Like, they almost bought the rights of that, not the book, but the name, just to have the name.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they bought the rights, and then the author, there's the famous author Tom Wolfe, who did Bonfire of the Vanities and several other many classics, and he would, to my knowledge, what I've read online and heard, he would sell his rights and then walk away. He would have nothing to do with the film, and they would do whatever they wanted. I haven't read any of his books in full, and I don't think I've seen any of the films from his adaptations of his books. But that, to my knowledge, is what would happen with him. He would just take his check and go the other way.
And would the whatever sort of adaptation, would it be good? Would it be successful?
It's interesting because when you have an adaptation for something that there's already that built-in audience from a book.
Yeah.
There is that, I don't want to say double-edged sword, but I guess
it definitely is.
Because they're going to come into it saying, I have to watch this because I've invested in the book.
Right.
And they're going to watch it at least once, and even if they hate it, they still watched it once.
True.
But then you have people who haven't read the book but have been interested in maybe reading the book or have heard about it, and they watch the film, and they really jive with it. And then maybe they read the book after, and even if there is differences, and there have been, forever
all the time,
adaptations that are so different. And I am of a belief, especially in this day and age, when you can adapt for TV and you can adapt for film, if the path for film is decided when it could be TV, but if the film adaptation is still impactful in its own right, even if it's not identical to the book, to appease the book fans in every little desired thing, then I would still consider it a success.
Yeah.
Because you can still get a whole new audience and appreciation for, this is the book, this is the film. There's a separation. George R. R. Martin always said it about when he'd be at Comic-Con panels and stuff between his book differences, the show differences.
Yeah.
He always made the comparison of how many children does Scarlett O'Hara have or something. And then it's like the whole comics of what in the books versus the film and blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't matter because she wasn't a real pure person in real life. So it's really what can be decided.
I thought you were going to go a different route with what you were saying. As far as the double-edged sword thing, as like, yes, you are going to get every fan in those seats.
Yeah.
But I think the other side of the sword of that is that you might be known for having one of the worst movies in people's eyes because of their expectations.
Oh, that is fair.
And it could have a bad taste on the property itself.
Yes, and that's especially if it's like a series or something.
Oh, sure.
And then then you see things being remade down the line.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So that's where I see it at least too.
Absolutely.
Was that? Oh, so that was all of them there.
All right.
That was all my honorable mentions. You could go on with yours.
I'll do a few of mine. Yeah.
Sure.
So because I've just got like a whole list, and some of the others I've listed, I've written into notes of my top 5 of like, if you enjoyed what I talked about this, here's another book.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna read a few others. Some people might be familiar with this one. It's called The Road it's the late Cormac McCarthy. He died about a year or so ago. It was during the pandemic time, 2020 summer. We'd escaped up to the Poconos for the weekends, and I brought this book along, and then I would be posting on my Instagram stories when I more frequently used to. I posted about that. I was reading that book, just like a photo of it with like the trees in the background.
Yeah.
And I remember getting so many DMs from people being like, "Oh my God, that's such a deep book." People who I talked to regularly, people who I hadn't spoken to in ages. And I was like, "Oh wow." And like after like the fifth person, I'm like, "You're the fifth person who's told me this."
Yeah.
And it's a post-apocalyptic book, and it's about this father and son who are traversing across America, basically, but it's a torn up America, and they're trying to get to safety.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many things going on. The government's been taken over. People are dead. There are not people around. You don't know who to trust. You don't have enough resources, but this father is trying to get him and his son to safety, or at the very least, get his son to safety.
Yeah.
It's because he's young and he wants, obviously him to live, even though the world has so dramatically changed and you're not totally clued in on everything, which I like I don't read post-apocalyptic and like dystopian books often, but when there's that ominous around in the background that something's bad happened and is happening, I think it's okay that like you don't have all the answers. You're on the road with them trying to get to somewhere better. And there's some more positive moments, and is this bonding of a parent and child, but it can get dark, and the father has to make some tough decisions at times in order to keep him and his son safe. So that's a book that had been around for years. I think in the early 2000s it came out, and I didn't read it till 2020, but I really enjoyed it. So it's definitely in my honorable mentions. I didn't think it would be a top 5, but it definitely is one that stayed with me. And like, if people are interested, I always say, if you're interested in a book, go for it.
Mm-hmm. Is that like a story where, sure, it's in a post-apocalyptic world, but it's not really focusing on the apocalypse? It's more focusing on, like, the apocalypse was there.
Yep.
But it's more focusing on the people.
It's a focus on the people. Yeah, the characters and their destination itself.
Yes, right.
You're not getting these
their relationship and everything, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then how they are interacting with now their reality.
Yes, okay. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's got that personality to it that I think a lot of my books will, even if they have a historical context and certain anecdotes that are prevalent and very true to the time they may take place, there's the humanistic aspect to the stories because of the characters, and that's something I personally jive with in books.
Okay, very nice.
And so we got that one. What else I'll say? I've got The Goldfinch. I wrote that one down. That's by Donna Tartt. That was made into a film quite a few years ago now. I think it was Ansel Elgort was in it. Okay. A lot of people, I didn't watch the film because it's like a 2-hour film and the book is like 900 pages.
Wow.
So you couldn't get everything in.
Right.
But the book, it's very interesting. It's about this young kid who's Ansel's character, who is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's in New York, and he's there with his mother, and then there's this bomb that goes off, and many people are lost, and he loses his mother. But before he leaves the museum, he steals the goldfinch, this specific piece of art that he always admired, with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then this story continues through several more decades of his life, and he has held onto this piece and kept it in other places.
Wow.
During the course of, he was living in New York, he was living with a classmate's family, then he got moved out towards his father out west. He's living with his father and stepmother, and then like he makes a friend out there who then they separate later on, but come back in later times when all of a sudden what he thought he'd kept safe was not safe, and now the piece of art has gone missing. Wow. And he's already established himself in an industry that deals with like antiquarian furniture, art, etc., but a lot of it has been duplicated, or I forget the specific term. There is a term for it. That it looks like it's an antique, but it's not.
Okay.
And so he's basically a scammer.
Yeah.
And then that's already kind of like known, but then what is coming forward is this piece of art. Now it's coming through the news, like, where's this been? We're still trying to find it.
Yeah.
And it's a very long book, but it's very interesting where it takes you, and then the conclusion that it comes to, you're just like, whoa.
All right.
So it's a good one, but it's very long. I don't mind a long book. I know some people don't, but I would say that definitely stayed with me. I know some people, I one time spoke to an ex-friend of a friend that about like, oh, like they worked in that industry with like art, antiquarian stuff. And I said, oh, like, did you read that book? And they had such negative opinions.
Oh, wow.
Because they're like, oh, such a bad depiction. I was like, okay, respect. I can get that.
Sure.
So, but yeah, so that's one on there. So this might be, I guess this is a little bit of the hot take versus positive take. I don't know, and perhaps it's jumping the gun because this could be one of your top fives. So Mitch Albom. A lot of us freshman year of high school read Five People You Meet in Heaven. It is good, but what I recommend to people is that they read his book that came out 2 years ago in 2021, The Stranger in the Lifeboat. It is very good. It may have some religious undertones, which might dissuade some people.
Sure.
And I'm by all means not this overly religious person at all. I grew up with like a Catholic background, and so that's a part of me. But the book itself it's just about like the human experience.
Yeah.
And it's about this boat that sets sail, and there's all these fancy smashy people on it, and then it capsizes. And then there's this lifeboat out there with 10 individuals, and they're all from different walks of life. But there's one of them who they don't recognize from the boat, and he's the Lord. And it's this whole thing of, is Jesus actually with them? And then the other side of the interspersed chapters between that time period of post the capsize on the lifeboat for these characters is back in the real world, the news about this ship, what happened, people are reacting because they had family, loved ones, whoever on it, very much like the Titanic.
Yeah.
And then also questions about, how could that have gone wrong? But this is also keeping up to like tease it a little flash forward from the capsize, because then there's, I forget where, it's like some island. I don't think it's in the States, but like in the Caribbean maybe. And the lifeboat appears and there's no one on it, but there's all these notes. And so the question is, did these people survive? Because here's their account of what happened.
Right.
And it's like, no, people must have survived because here's this thing written. So it's it plays with you. He's got like that fantastical quality, as we know from Five People You Meet in Heaven.
Yes.
So if you enjoyed that, it's got that. And like, yes, there's the religious undertones, but they're not like hitting you across the head. And there is like that kind of cat and mouse chase of like, I want to know these answers. Like, what is actually going on?
Right.
Because of his dealing with the fantastical for his writing.
Mitch, what's
Mitch Albom?
I think fantastic. Most of the books that have been written, I think are great. There's another one. I think it was soon after Five People You Meet in Heaven. Very popular too. I can't think.
with Maury.
Yes, there's that one too. I know is very popular as well. Five People You Meet in Heaven. I did very much enjoy it.
Yeah.
It was. I should have put it on as an honorable mention, but it's not even on my top five.
No, it's not. No, I mean, when we read it before freshman year, I remember being like, it was okay. Everyone read it because everyone was like, oh, I got to read this because it's what everyone's reading.
Yeah, so right.
That was, I'm a 14-year-old reading that, and then I'm reading Stranger in the Lifeboat as, I don't remember if I was 27 or 28 at the time. I think it might have still been 27. And it was, I just instantly was like, wow, this is like, I like didn't anticipate being so touched. And, it made me wonder, like, maybe I should read some of his other stuff or give Five People You Meet in Heaven a try at another later date.
Sure.
But this one, I definitely, if people enjoyed that many years ago, now as an adult, maybe give this newer one a try. Yeah,
without a doubt. Now that's one of the ones that I'm going to keep in mind now, too, for sure.
And so I said, like, Goldfinch was very long. He's not long at all. Very short.
They are. They are short. Yeah.
But they're concise.
Very nice.
There's a lot of authors, like, there is, I think, this kind of dilemma of, do books all have to be long? But some of the greatest books and manuscripts that are delivered, and the reason they get snatched up by publishers and agents, is to compact 60,000 words, and everything in it is so neatly tied up, and everything, it's the flourishes here and there. Not that you can't, pitter patter around and like prolongate certain scenes and chapters.
Sure.
But when a book can be that concise and still be effective and have a whole story that, goes over a period of time, like there's something great about that.
Absolutely. And I think for, say, a book that like the Golden Finch?
Golden Finch, yeah.
For something like that to be like 900 pages or whatnot, I think there are the ones that, not that they deserve to be that long, but it's needed to be that long too, to complete your full story. And that's also the beauty of books too. They could be as long as they want.
Exactly.
Yep.
And
that's great.
Yep, absolutely. I think there's a place and time for every book and what they need to do.
Yes.
And however much of a story they need to tell. Like the Goldfinch tells a very long story, and Stranger in the Lifeboat, it may have two different sort of timelines going on, but in each it tells enough of the story that like to get across the actual plot itself, as well as like the inner, themes, metaphors, etc., you name it.
Yeah.
The things that you leave you with it. You may not remember the exact plot point, but certain points within the story or scenes that happen or the ending perhaps, or like I said, or a certain scene, if it stays with you, I think that's that's definitely why I put it on my honorable mention.
Impact, and if it stays with you, two of the biggest things.
Yep. Yeah. And then if you did 4, I'll do my last one. So anything, this is not the title of the book, but it's anything by Anne Patchett. So I've only read 2 of her works of fiction. Her latest that came out last summer called Tom Lake, and then previous to that was about almost 4 years before, was called The Dutch House. And you'll see a little bit in some of my top 5, like family and relationships related. What we have on the back of a book, like the barcode stuff, there's a BISAC is what we call it, and there might be like a text written like fiction or something, or might say like fiction stroke women, or family and relationships. So like definitely her stories revolve around a family, a particular person, and their relations, as well as their relations outside the family unit. But it's very no matter the kind of family you come from. And it's very interesting how she's written so many different characters across all her different books, that like she keeps having these great ideas, and they just leave you with that impact again, like that imprint of like you're reading, you feel like you're reading someone's life, but it's actually like fiction,
right?
And so that's what her stuff. It's like it's impactful in that way. And my grandmother's a big fan of hers. I know a lot of people that like have become fans of hers, and I didn't know about her really till I was in the industry, and she's like an author that I definitely will continue to read.
Very nice.
It's her recent one, Tom Lake. I remember it was slow in the beginning, and it's actually an interesting story. It's a lot of authors had what they call, and they talk about this in all their interviews. They had their COVID book, and hers truly, this one was a pandemic book in the sense, but she doesn't make it really known. You only catch it when you're reading between the lines and certain things said.
Yeah.
What happens is the story takes place at like an orchard in Ohio, I think, and this mother and father, their 3 adult daughters, all return home because it's the pandemic. Everyone's locking in, and they own this orchard, and so like the daughters are all home. One of them is technically already home, and they're helping take care of things because the parents have to send home all their actual like workers from the farm, for whatever reasons, because of the pandemic, etc. And they're taking care of this orchard, but the title comes from this theater company, like one of those summer stock productions.
Sure.
And the mother, she had been an aspiring actress, was on her way, and that was the name of the theater. It was called Tom Lake, and it's near where the orchard is. And so there's all these like little things that tie back together eventually. And it's like then this retelling of the daughters are all home, and they've asked the story 100 times before, but now they want their mother to tell it again about the guy who was her love interest in the play. And I forget which the play they do specifically, and he went on to be a successful actor. And like a big time this and that, and she stepped away from acting. She had done that after she'd done a few little roles before. Our Town, that's the play they do, which I didn't know about until this book. And now the daughters, as adults, they're getting this story retold about her like summer in like summer stock, like play theater world.
Wow, okay.
But it's interesting, and it goes between the present time as they're trying to grapple with the world around them. Like the youngest daughter was in her senior year of college, and now she's not going to have a graduation because she's got to go home.
Yeah.
And I think she's the daughter that was trying to be an actress, and so now she's like, what's going to happen to the acting? And then no one's acting.
Right.
They can't film things, so it's like all these little things. And then it will flip back to the time period of when the mother was young and she was an aspiring actress. But it's these like mother, daughters, parent, child, and just family, friends, community relationships that like she just does very well.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay.
But yes.
All right. Main top 5?
If you're ready. Yep.
All right. Let's do it. All right. I will do my 5 and 4.
All right.
So this is one that we did read in school. I forgot what grade and whatnot. Of Mice and Men, by John Steinbeck.
Okay.
I believe I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
So loved this book, and this is really when I was really into reading books and whatnot, right? And this is one we had to read for school. And usually, like, when I'm forced to read something, I would think that I'm not going to enjoy it as much because of that reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But most of those books we read were fantastic. Were fantastic, right? And then they had the movie of Mice and Men. It's about the main one, the star of the show, like the one where the tragedy happens. You got Lenny there.
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for sad endings, but like also heartfelt endings as well.
Bittersweet.
Bittersweet. And this is definitely one of those stories. I don't even want to spoil it necessarily what happens at the end, but it's sad. It's sad. Yep. And oh man, like the movie was fantastic too. Like I don't know. Like it's just I don't know why. I hate that it has to be that makes it so impactful for me, but I think that's with a lot of people too. So that's my number 5 right there. It's probably, well, it's not. I have one more that 2 more actually we read in school that are on this list.
Yeah.
So we'll do another one. Number 4, another tragic ending, Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rolls. This is the one with the boy and the 2 dogs. I believe they're like some sort of bloodhound or something like that.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and they're both the bloodhounds there. I forgot the names of the dogs, but they were very Old Smoky maybe or something like that. I'm not too sure.
Something of that ilk.
Of those lines, right?
Or no, Ann and Dan or something.
Oh wait, Old Dan, not Old Smoky.
Old Dan
there was Old Dan, something like that. Yeah.
Oh god, that came out of somewhere.
Now this one hit even harder than of Mice and Men because, all right, maybe I'll spoil a little bit because of Lenny. He dies at the end. Like that's a human, but when you bring dogs dying at the end of a movie, now I'm even more heartbroken. Yep.
I remember not seeing any of that.
No, me neither.
We're like 12 years old
reading
this, and it's like, what?
I remember the teacher, like, because we would all take turns, like, reading out loud, right? Like, either a page or even a whole chapter of a book or whatever. And I think the teacher, who I'm sorry, whoever it was, I can't remember who it was at the time when I read the book. She was tearing up, man. And she's probably read this thing 1,000 times with classes and everything like that. You know what I mean? It's that a very impactful story. Like, I don't know. And I believe it was Old Dan, because they at the end of the book, I'm just going to go into spoiler. This is what's most impactful to me. I don't care.
Yeah.
I forgot what kind of cat it was. Like maybe not a bobcat, mountain lion. It was a mountain lion that the 2 dogs were fighting, or at least Old Dan was fighting, I believe. And Old Dan ultimately died.
Right.
And the craziest part of the story to me was that those 2 dogs were so close together that I think it was only a day or 2 after Old Dan died.
I remember,
she passed away too.
Yep. That they were bonded.
They were bonded.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which happens with pets.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I think you also see that with humans as well. If you have 2 people that have been married for, say, 40, 50 years, and are very old at that time, there are stories out there, like say the husband dies or the wife dies or whatever. Like, like they eventually, sometimes they do, like maybe a couple days to maybe a month or so later or whatnot.
Right.
People are bonded. I believe animals are bonded and everything, and I think this is one of those perfect stories where it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, the connection.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. It's like, it's sad when they die, but then somehow I remember that ending, like there is a positive after it. I forget. Because I think the main character, he like learns just about like maturing and like, part of life.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot the kid's name in the book.
I couldn't tell you.
It was a very long time ago. It was a very long time ago. But I just love that I can remember most of these impactful moments, even still now, because it was that impactful to me and whatnot. So I love it for that.
Absolutely.
So that's my number 5 and 4 of Mice and Men, and then Where the Red Fern Grows.
All right. Nice. Little bit of throwbacks. I like that.
Yeah.
Nice.
You can do your 5 and 4.
All righty. Yeah. I wrote many notes, but I don't have to talk about every little bit about them.
Go right ahead, man. I don't care.
But my number 5 is, for those that are listening, watching, may have heard of this. It came out June 2nd, 2020. It was the Good Morning America book club pick for that month, and it was a New York Times bestseller for like a year and a half plus, on and off the number 1 spot.
All right.
You know, reaching out back to what we talked about earlier. The book is called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett.
Okay.
Full disclosure, the reason I ordered this book was I kept getting ads for it on Instagram, and the cover was really pretty. And I was like, that's nice art. I want this.
Yeah.
So I pre-ordered it, and then it came, or I ordered it. I think it was already out, and not really paying attention to it was on the lists yet.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I got it, and then I was like, oh wow, like this is apparently popular right now. It's popping off. Maybe I should read it, and like I read it within that summer. And I wrote down one thing I had from my Goodreads review, and Goodreads is an app or website where you can like rate and review books.
Oh, cool!
And leave you can leave a review. You can just rate them, whatever you want to do. You can log how many books you read for the year. I try to read 50 books a year. I was not successful this past year, but the 2 years before I was.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very good.
But one word I wrote down, and I've written here, was on my Goodreads review, was I said this book was riveting. So that's definitely was one of the reasons I put it down as my number 5. Basically, to set the scene, it is in the Deep South in a fictional town called Mallard. And the Vignes sisters, they're twins, Desiree and Stella, you kind of open with when they're much younger and they've witnessed this horrifying atrocity to their father. I won't say what, but people can kind of piece things together.
Sure.
As they grow up into teenagehood, they kind of want to break out of the town, and they eventually do run away. And no one knows what happens to them because this is like the 50s. And so there's really no way of being able to track them.
Sure.
Or 50s or 60s at that point. But anyways, so they go to, I believe, New Orleans. And then a couple years after being there together in a boarding house, working this and that, the two of them separate themselves. The thing about the town of Mallard, and the Vignes sisters in particular, is a lot of people are of mixed heritages and backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so in the case of the twins, they would be what you would consider white passing. And so at that time, when obviously for people of color or wherever, it was harder to get a job.
Yeah.
And so the one twin in a job application puts down that she's white. And then she goes on to the rest of her life passing as white. And the other sister doesn't do that. And then they separate. And there's that reason that causes separation, as well as they were very different people from the start.
Yeah.
And then they go their separate ways. And then it's interesting how a different branch of the family down the line brings these stories sort of back together. And then from that brings revelations to that branch of the family. In particular, so I'll spoil it. Their daughters meet. And their daughters don't look like their cousins at all. And so because of the decisions that these twins made of then who they married and partnered up with and etc. And these daughters of theirs, first cousins that they are, meet, and then they become friends without, sort of friends, we'll say, friendly. But then the one cousin knows that that is her aunt, but she doesn't know how to tell this other girl, we are cousins, because she won't believe it. And it's going back and forth between the different locations in the States, these daughters and these sisters who have now been alienated, how their stories are going to intersect. It's really...
And is that why she won't tell the other cousin?
Because she
knows the conflict between the two?
The conflict of then her cousin, who's this blonde and white, fair-skinned girl.
Yeah.
How is she going to believe that this girl who is very black, a specific description they use is called blue-black, which was, I guess a racial connotation.
Yeah, yeah.
How is she going to believe that we are cousins? But the one girl, Jude, she knows because she looks at the woman who is her aunt she sees her at a party that Jude is like waitering for, and she instantly knows, why does she look like my mother? And then the pieces get put together about, wait, my mother had an estranged sister, but I never met. This has to be. And so then it's this whole, and Jude lives her own life, and she doesn't really want to interfere, but like a part of her wants to, because she wants to have that relationship, and she feels that her girl who's her cousin should know.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. The nice thing is, again, it's one of those stories where there's a lot of the historical context is happening in the background, but then the main focal of the story is the relationships of the family, and as well as the different communities they are a part of. So like the one twin and her daughter move back down to Mallard and they live their life, but then the other one, who was white passing, can't remember which twin was which, she goes on with her husband and her daughter, and they live like a very like rich California life, and then things begin to intersect down the line. It's interesting, the contract, and this author wrote this when she was like younger than us, like 27.
Really?
It's only her second book.
Wow.
Yep. And she seems lovely from interviews, but yeah, so it's really good. And I wrote down riveting. I know for a fact has to be because I started it and it was good, and then it kept picking up, and then I finished the last half in like one sitting out by the pool.
Wow.
That summer, because I just was like, I have to get to the end, because once those connections happened, the cousins made the realizations, this and that, I was like, I got to get to this ending.
Right.
And it has a satisfied ending. I don't think it's what people would say like, oh yes, this was the perfect ending, but sometimes it doesn't have to be the most perfect ending or exactly what you're imagining.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sometimes it's good for it to not be as predictable, or what you want for that matter.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. Yeah. So that's one. And then another book I wrote down that if you're interested in that, it's 800 pages though. It's called The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and it's by Honoré Jeffers. That came out in August of 2021, I think. And I read it like a few months later. Very good, very long. Similar sort of stories about like family and relationships, mothers and daughters, parents, etc., finding your way in the world. But the interesting with that book was half of the story is told about the more present timeline of a young girl, Ailey, all the way up until her 30s, almost 40, I would say. And then the other half of the story, where it intersperses the chapters, it's like going way back to her ancestors and then all the way up to the present line. And like, there's a family tree in the book if you get a print edition, so you can connect all the dots. It's interesting. It's like this person, and the author Dr. Jeffers, she's like a poet laureate or something, and so how she writes is also very lyrical. And the fact she wrote like an 800-page book about this like fictional like history, but to her these characters were real. So because some of them came to her in dreams, and it's really interesting. But yeah, it's not for the faint heart in the sense of it's 800 pages. So, but it's if you enjoyed Vanishing Half and you have a little more time, I would suggest Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Okay, very good. So far, your list has been more recent books that have come out.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah. I mean, college times didn't always allow for the most reading, but I you'll see some of my list. It bounces between more recent books to a few from yesteryear.
Okay, very, very cool. Very nice.
But so on that note, we'll go to number 4, and this book is called, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, it's called The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell by Robert Dugoni, and it came out in April 24th, 2018. I didn't read it till a couple summers ago. It actually was my aunt and my grandma had read it, and then I had read it, and then I passed it on to another aunt in the family, and I would suggest this book for anyone that, was into, a story that's for anyone that feels like they were an outsider from like youth to adulthood and finding their way in the world, but also for those who grew up in a Catholic setting, whether you went to Catholic school, whether you just went to a Catholic church, etc., or a Catholic university, because the theme of Catholicism is very prevalent in this story. But to set the stage, there's this married couple who struggle to have a child, and then the wife falls pregnant and she has a son, and his name is Sam. But he's not albino, but he's born with red eyes. And it's this very specific, and that's why he gets the name Sam Hell, because then when he goes to school as a child, he's called like, Sam Hell as like a, and demon, this demon kid and stuff, like teasing, taunting, because he has this rare eye condition. But he's got like brown hair, he's not like pale or anything, like an albino. But he's born with this condition, and, everyone kind of reacts strangely to it, but the mother's very devout to her Catholic faith, and she's like, no, this is a blessing, this is like a sign from God, like he's special, Sam is special. And that's how she always treats him. He's a very bright, intelligent kid as he grows up, and because his mother kind of instilled this a little bit in him, the idea of like, no, you are special, and like you will be something. And so that kind of helps push him along, even though he's got all these bullies and people on the outside. Sure. But his one of his best friend, his best guy friend, Ernie, I think is his name. Yeah, he's like the only black kid in school. But then, and same thing with him. Like, but then he goes on to be this like professional football player, and so like goes over adversity as well. And then their other best friend, who's a girl, Mickey, she came from like a broken home. She's a bit of a recluse. She uses Sam's like mother as like a surrogate mother, basically, because like her home life is not the greatest. And these three like overcome things and go on to their careers, and it's a whole story about Sam's life from like birth to like his 40s. But there are certain things from the past that come back to haunt him and his friends and his community later on in life. Certain characters who may or may not have been the kindest to him when he was growing up, and they come back in later forms. And it's at a time when Sam has kind of come into his own. He's wearing contact lenses that have like a brown color, all that stuff. And he's ironically, with the whole eye thing, he's an optometrist, I think, an eye doctor. And so the optometrist, the eye doctor, I think ophthalmologist is like for the glasses. But anyways, and he has to reckon with this past figure, as well as reckoning with just his Catholic faith, because then his mother falls very ill. And after having, a life that she was devoted to God, this and that, even though her son was, berated by the nuns, this and that, like she still kept a strong faith. And now suddenly she's fallen ill. And he's never had a strong faith, Sam. He has a faith, and I can relate to that, like not being super devout, but having a faith, and it's a personal faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's one,
same way.
I've always felt like just for me, at least in my own relationship. And so there's this one impactful quote that like I took with my phone, I took a photo of. So I wrote it down. It's when he's basically crying out to God saying, "Is this what she gets for her devotion? I'm done asking for things for myself. I'm done asking to be normal, for my eyes to change color. But she deserves better. My father deserves better. If this is God's will, then I am asking for you to intervene and for once show me why I am supposed to believe that all of this is for a reason. I want to believe, okay? But you have to give me some reason to believe." And it was just like this moment where he's just like crying out. And, he was a kid who like went through a lot, but kept it to himself. Yeah. And so you see this as a man, as an adult, he's, what can we do? Because she's not well. And then he goes on to having to take care of both his parents, because then they both fall ill for different reasons. Wow. So it's, I would like to think, and I wrote down, there is a justified happy ending. Yeah. But, there's definitely some dark moments, and I think it's because it comes with anyone, you reckon with your faith, you reckon with just life itself and the people in that life. So, but this book stayed with me. I know my aunts loved it, my grandma loved it. I definitely recommend it. I think it was done by Amazon, actually. It was the publisher. Oh yeah, and they have like some like publishing, not just like self-publishing. Right. Like there is like a publisher through them, and yeah, this book I definitely recommend. I never would have known about it. I also like that quote in particular, the whole "reason to believe," because it's one of my favorite songs by Bruce Springsteen. That also kind of ties in a bit. But yeah, I recommend this, and it's broken up into parts and across the whole course of his life. And there are like other little things, like there's like an earthquake that happens because it takes place in San Francisco, and I think that earthquake like actually legitimately happened in history. So there's like little anecdotes like that. Yeah, where it's just like, oh, this thing actually happened, and then it's like, here's this fictional character, but this could have been something that happened to someone.
Right. Absolutely.
I think he was at a football game with Ernie, and then they were caught there when it happened, and they survived. But it's San Francisco earthquakes. You never know what's going to happen.
Is it more of a sad story throughout the whole time? It sounds that way.
Yeah, it's pretty sad because there's so I'll kind of spoil the whole if we don't mind.
I don't care.
The thing that comes back to haunt him was there was one particular bully who was like a typical bully. Yeah. Down the line, Sam has a visit from this mother and her daughter, and the daughter's had like a very bad vision. There's something wrong with like the retinas in the back, that like to the point that like if she doesn't have a certain surgery done, like she could go blind. And she's only like 9 years old or something, maybe even younger. Come to find out, the daughter's father is this bully from Sam's past.
Whoa.
And Sam is aware of what he was capable of as a child. He can't imagine what he's capable of to his own daughter.
Oh my God.
But Sam is petrified to report him, even though Ernie and Mickey know of that past for Sam. They're like, you have to do something. But Sam is afraid what this man will do to his... I think he's still married to the wife. I don't think they're split. Mm-hmm. But she wants to divorce him, but she also realizes she can't, because then God forbid he has the daughter one weekend, who knows what he'll do to her.
Wow.
So it's it's sad. I think a lot of my picks might be sad, but there is a happy-ish ending for Sam and his friends. But he has to, again, when he thought he'd overcome adversity and life was fine, this comes walking back in, and he's like, and that's another thing then throw into the fact with his mother being ill. Mm-hmm. And, that's why it adds into the whole complex of, like, I think for anyone that is Catholic or religious of any kind, it's definitely a book that allows you to think about your faith, however you view it.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I love that, actually. Mm-hmm. I love that.
I sadly don't have the copy on me because I borrowed it. So whenever I do tell people about it, I'm like, I don't have a copy, but go out and buy it, and you can easily order off Amazon for sure.
Well, that's okay. I'm gonna have a picture of the book cover, or if you could send me your, I don't know if there's like other renditions of the cover, maybe your favorite one you could send me. I'll put it up on the video as we explain each book and whatnot.
Okay, yeah, I can do that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty.
Yes. So enough of my spiel.
all good. I'm going to switch two things around. Not only that am I going to switch two things around, but I'm also going to replace one.
All right.
Now, don't get me wrong. I did love this book, The Giver by Lois Lowry.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, I remember it being like a very almost like mysterious. It wasn't a mystery book by any means, but definitely like eerie, like sort of feel. Mm-hmm. That's at least what I got from it. Yeah. Fortunately, I don't really remember most of it, like not even the ending necessarily. So I'm going to take that out.
All right.
So I don't want to down it by any means.
No.
I'm gonna put the 5 people you meet in heaven at the number 3 spot.
All right.
Because you brought it up before.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, how did I not like even think about it? So that, and we already talked about it a little bit too and whatnot. Yeah. I won't go too far into it. My number 2 is Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin.
The first one.
Okay. Yes. Now I fully read the first 2 books.
Okay.
Got a little more than halfway through the third one, and I stopped maybe about a year ago.
Okay.
Because got the new job and everything like that. Life just got busy and everything like that. Let me tell you something. Game of Thrones, the book, is the first book I read in a very long time, and it was obviously mainly because of the TV show. Like, the TV show ended and everything. I wanted to keep the hype for myself going for the series and franchise itself. So I read the first one. I was really interested in seeing what kind of like a compare and contrast thing.
Oh, absolutely.
From show and the book and whatnot. Now, my opinion on the first... Did you watch Game of Thrones?
I did.
You did? Okay.
Yep.
So the first season of the show was very much a slow burn to me, but with a shocking ending. And it really that ending set the tone for the rest of the series, right?
Right.
But nonetheless, like a very slow burn.
Yep.
I felt the total opposite with the book.
Okay.
And I don't know if it was because I already knew parts of what was going to happen, because also, don't get me wrong, too, like, a lot of differences in the book, a lot more information in the book, and different scenes with characters saying different things and everything like that. Not saying different things in the same scene, saying different things in other scenes that you learn more about them in that sense, too, and whatnot. I thought the first book was incredible. I thought it was also the perfect size. It might have been I don't remember how many pages
I can't remember either,
but perfect size book. I read it in the course of 2 weeks, and
oh wow, that's good.
And not even that, dude. Not like a little less than 2 weeks, let's say, right? It was the time I went to Africa one year, like maybe a year, maybe not even a year after college.
Okay.
And the plane ride is extremely long.
Right. Yep.
So I wanted to pick a book to read on the plane.
You have the
Chose
time.
that. Mm-hmm. And I read more than halfway on the flight there. And then finished it up.
Oh, nice.
Well before the plane landed back in Jersey.
Right.
So I enjoyed it very, very much.
Yep.
And you know, the differences from show to book or book to show, whatever.
Yep.
Didn't bother me. It's its own thing. It's its own form of the story. And
Absolutely.
and I loved it. Then, you know, to move on to the second book and whatnot, I enjoyed it very much as well. A little bit longer, as most series do. They become longer and longer in the books and whatnot, especially like something I never touched. Sorry, guys. Harry Potter. Never touched it.
It's okay.
I saw the books. Yeah. I saw the size of the books, and I was like, oh, maybe when I have the time, which, you know, I in reality, that's when I had the time, when I saw when I was younger, but whatever, you know. But the second book was also very good.
Nice.
Third book, I couldn't even really tell you why, besides other things going on in life and being busy. Like, that might have been the only reason. It's not because I hated it by any means, or didn't like, or wasn't interested in the story.
Yep.
And it's something I do want to pick up somewhat soon too, again, and actually probably start over the third book as well. I probably wouldn't want to pick up where I left off, because I'm not going to remember exactly where I left off either.
I've started and stopped books, and I wish I was better about reading it the whole way through and not like putting it away for too long, because even though I may enjoy it, I still feel like, is this like a 5-star book? I didn't actually sit down and read it in a shorter period of time, or just devote myself to solely that book.
Right. Have you ever read more than one book at once?
I kind of am doing that right now.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I had the bold idea of I need to read more nonfiction, because like my whole list is fiction. We've mostly been talking fiction.
Yeah.
And so I've been reading on and off a couple nonfiction books in this new year, and I haven't finished either of them. One is on the history of J. Crew, and then one is more of a medieval, like, historical account, but it's like parts of medieval history that like I wasn't totally aware of, and it's mentioning certain historical figures that I'm like, oh, okay, like didn't know about that, or I loosely heard of it. So they're very different, and I'm trying to be better about nonfiction. Maybe it's because I mostly work in designing nonfiction that I don't choose to read it on my own time.
Sure.
But yeah, so I'm reading those, and I think I got another fiction book, 2 other like fiction books I've been on and off with too. So I wish I hadn't done that to myself. I mean, it's great then when you can finish boom, 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 like all of them like around the same time. But like then you're like kind of left with, I haven't finished a book in months.
Right. Yeah.
Then that feels like, I feel like I'm slacking.
Yeah, and maybe not giving it the utmost attention that maybe it like deserves. Maybe too.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's how I would look at it. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
I would be. If I wanted to read a book, like for me at least, I would probably just read one at a time for me. For me, like I don't know, because like I want to respect it. I want to respect the book too, and there's nothing you're not respecting it by any means either.
No. You're still reading it.
Yeah, you're still reading it, you know. But yeah, I need to give the utmost attention to it per se. So yeah, that was my 3 and 2. I bet you, even though I am a 1 slow reader,
I'm slow at reading. It doesn't matter if I try to read 50 books a year. I'm a slow reader.
Are you? Yeah.
I'm very slow.
So it between that and I don't know even when I'm gonna re-pick up that third book, I bet you I'll still finish that series and catch up before the time that last book comes out.
I mean, there is no doubt about that. Let me tell you. We've been waiting. We should have known. You know. I mean, I think, I don't know if I told you this at Luke and Kayla's wedding, that the reason books 4 and 5 are split up is because you couldn't put that many pages together. A book wouldn't be able to hold.
I did. Yeah, you did tell me that.
There was like an actual production. And this is obviously way before I was in publishing. We were still in school. And when that all happened, I think we were still in high school when book 4 came out, I think. Or maybe book 5, I can't remember. So that's Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the Dance with Dragons, the historical event in Westeros. A Dance of Dragons, or whichever the fifth book is called.
Something like that.
Yeah. And so they're happening at the same time until the last 10 point of view chapters, I think, of Dance, where then it's like, okay, now everyone's at the same page, and now you reintroduce some of those characters from Feast, like Jaime and Cersei's point of views, into the end of Dance, because now everything's sort of caught up. And then, of course, then George leaves us hanging. We have never had winds.
Yeah.
Forget Dream of Spring. I mean, a part of me once thought in college, it was like, okay, he's gonna surprise us with wins, and then be like, okay, and Dream is done too. And that's going to come out, like, officially, like, in a month. Like, surprise, like, I had to get real. And so whenever they happen, If they happen.
If they happen to.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
But he is very smart, though, with what he's been doing as far as, making the money. Because,
there's no doubt about it.
The producing roles he has on several different things now.
Yep.
Not even just Game of Thrones. He was a big storyteller in that video game that came out, Elden Ring.
Right. Yep.
And that movie became, that game became huge.
He's a genius.
He is a genius in that sense.
Yeah.
But, I think he's also being a little negligent to the fans.
Yes. Because
I think so.
Fans would go out and buy it. Whether
without a doubt.
Yeah, people, and especially fans who maybe didn't read the previous books, but they were unsatisfied. They were unsatisfied with the TV series ending,
which a lot of people were.
They might be like, "I'm just gonna go get this book because then this will change things potentially."
Right.
Although, for those, as you know, and even in book up to book 3, there's characters being introduced who aren't introduced at all in the show.
Oh yeah,
and that continues on through 4 and 5, and then potentially in 6 and 7. That so many characters who were never brought up into the show, maybe they were morphed into other character storylines.
Yeah, like for instance, Lady Stark, Lady
the Stone, what's it called? Stoneheart.
Stoneheart, yeah, Lady Stoneheart.
Yep.
Yes,
that's one of the sticking points for a lot of fans of the books to show.
Yeah,
that they didn't get that at all. I was okay with it. I understand where they're coming from, but I understand that, and maybe this was just HBO's decision, and I don't know that for certain, and I say that for legal reasons to the camera.
right.
That to cut costs and focus on the other storylines, Catelyn died, and we're just going to keep her dead.
Exactly.
We're not going to bring back this other character.
I think it would have lost some of the impact. I was like, she died in probably the most famous and heart-wrenching, surprising moment in the show, the Red Wedding. And then, but she will be back in future episodes, in a new form or whatever.
Yep.
I think it would have lost some of the impact, the Red Wedding. And I think, I would like to think that's the main reason why they didn't do it in the show.
Yeah.
Some things are meant to stay in the book. Some things are meant to just be in the show and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I watched 1, 2, and 3 binged ahead of a few months ahead of season 4, and so I wasn't there when the Red Wedding aired and stuff. And I believe the episode after that is titled Mother, because that's the episode where all the people in Essos called Daenerys Misa.
Oh yeah.
And people got leaked that was the title of the next episode was Mother, and a lot of fans, to my understanding, and I could be wrong, but this is what I thought I heard, thought that then that meant that Stoneheart was going to happen because she was the mother of the Starks. But then it didn't happen, and that scene with Daenerys was obviously impactful, but there were a lot of people who went in thinking, oh, okay, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then it never did, and then season 4 went through, didn't happen, season 5 didn't happen, and at that point, by season 5 especially, when they totally flipped Sansa's story, which was difficult to watch than what you then for the books, I won't spoil.
Yeah, I'm curious to what you even mean.
It's a lot lighter. She basically stays up the veil and everything's fine. Because
Really?
Littlefinger is keeping everyone in the dark of what's going on around Westeros. And he's preparing the veil, and Sansa is still posing. In the show, they say, I forget what they say. I think they say she's his bastard niece. But in the books, it's she is his bastard daughter, Elaine, as they say in the show too. But then they keep up that facade that she is a bastard, and then that her cousin, the one that used to, breastfeed with his mother even when he was old enough.
Yeah.
He is in the dark that is his actual cousin Sansa. Because obviously Littlefinger is afraid that should this kid say anything, then the Lords of the Vale will be like, this is Sansa, which obviously we know in the season, towards the end of season 4, when Sansa confesses, and that flipped the game around. So then what happens in the books is there's the preview chapter for Elaine. They're having a tourney and everything's all jolly, this and that, but Elaine, Sansa, is having to pose as Elaine. And you see some elements of the Sansa that comes to being in the rest of the show.
Yeah.
In this, when she unfortunately goes through what to do with Ramsay, she doesn't go through that in the book. But
Sansa doesn't go through that in the books
with
Ramsay?
There is if you want that, there's this whole fake Arya storyline. And it's this girl who you meet in the books, I don't even remember, Jane Poole, early on, very minor. And she comes to King's Landing with the Starks, with Ned and the girls. And then the city is sacked and Ned is arrested. Arya goes missing. Sansa's held prisoner. And she's held prisoner with this childhood friend of hers. And Jane is then taken away. But really, she's taken away by Littlefinger. And remember, he owns a brothel.
Right.
She's brought there. She's kind of taught certain things, not used as an employee. And then all of a sudden you end, it is in Storm of Swords, so you haven't seen it at the end if you haven't finished that one. And Jaime Lannister sees her setting off, but she's posing as Arya. She says, "Oh, you haven't seen me in a while, Sir Jaime, but I'm Arya Stark, and I'm going to marry Lord Bolton's son. I'm the happiest person in the world." And that's when Jaime says, "Stop what you're doing," to Brienne. He says, "You need to go, not just find Sansa, you need to find Arya, but don't go to Winterfell. Don't believe what's being said through the realm. That's not Arya. That's a fake Arya. So don't be fooled. Don't go there. I don't know what's going on there, but be on the lookout for Arya, because clearly she might still be alive."
Yeah.
But because Brienne basically only focuses on Sansa because they don't know about Arya, but he basically says, "Don't go there if you hear these rumors about Arya Stark marrying Ramsay, now Bolton, because it's not Arya."
Wow.
And then what happens to Sansa happens to Jane, the fake Arya. Online we say Faria with a lowercase f, a capital A.
Yeah.
And it's sad, obviously, but it's not the impact the show did, where you developed with Sansa and then you witness her go through this, but then she becomes this boss-ass bitch.
Yeah, right.
And so you see that boss-ass bitchness in the Vale, in the books, in the preview chapters, and she's coming into her own, and she's learning from Littlefinger, as she learned from Marjorie, as she learned from Cersei. She's taking all these things like she did in the show, and then she's applying it to her own ways, and she's making her own rules. And so you start to see that, but she's having to pose as a bastard, which is difficult, but she's also free in a way, because she's like, no one really knows who I am.
Right.
And she's kind of having fun with that, but it's also this fear of, how long can I keep this ruse up?
Yeah.
Until all hell
and then
breaks
what
loose,
will happen
when people find out?
Yeah.
And but yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah.
I think I'm definitely getting back into it for sure. The books.
So that's a sample chapter, because then in book 4, Feast of Crows, that's kind of like a little bit of how season 4 was for Sansa, where it's like she's in the Vale, they're keeping her under wraps and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm a ASOIF fan, and I had read the first book during Hurricane Sandy time, and then the summers when I was a lifeguard, I was reading the other books before college and during college, and I enjoyed them, but they're definitely hefty. And not in the subject matter, just hefty.
Hefty books.
Small print and many pages.
Oh boy, yeah.
But yeah.
All right, very good. That was 4. Well, no, that was 3 and 2.
Okay.
You can move on to yours.
Alrighty, yeah. I don't want to delay too much on my 3 and 2, because my 1, I'm curious to see how you'll feel. But so number 3, it's another recent one. It came out April 5th, 2022. It's called Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. He is of Scottish descent, and this was his second novel, his sophomore novel, you could say.
Okay.
His debut had came out 2 years before, a little over 2 years before, and that was called Sugarybane, and it actually won the Booker Prize. So he's got a lot of success over in the UK, and he has a presence here in the States, and I'm sure it is going to continue to climb.
Yeah.
Because he's gotten these awards and accolades. And actually, and I think I'm correct in saying it, for both these books, they have already been, their rights have gone to BBC and A24 for adaptations.
That's great.
Yeah. I think Mungo definitely with A24, and I think Shuggy as well. Shuggy, I know that it's in the works with something with the BBC as well.
Well, both of those.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
So it shows something, and to the topic of, I think we said it earlier about like books to adaptations. These are books that, like, if they weren't adapted, that's fine. A lot of these books I've chosen, none of them are have adaptations, nor will maybe most of them, they might never.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Sometimes there's a beauty in that. But it's nice when someone like A24 comes along and is like, we want to make this into something, a show or a film. And the one thing with Douglas is his works of fiction are very based off his own personal history. He grew up with an alcoholic parent, and so in the premise of Sugarybane, it is very much the relationship between Shuggy, the son, and his mother, Agnes, who is an alcoholic, and he's this young 8-year-old boy. and he's trying to keep his family together as his older siblings. So I'll talk a little bit about both of them, but both books. And he's trying to keep things together, whereas in Mungo, this is a 15-year-old boy, and the mother, she has her issues and her own demons to deal with, but she's sort of is looking to move away from her children because all her children are teenagers, and Mungo's left at home. His older brother's in a gang, Hamish, and their father had been like a gang lord. It takes place in Glasgow, I should say, and this is in the early 90s, Glasgow, Scotland, so this is post-Thatcher times. So there's a lot of factors going on I'll get into as well. And so you have Hamish, who is the total opposite of Mungo's a lot softer. He's into art, a lot more quiet, subdued. Yeah. Hamish is, and it's actually interesting that Mungo looks like the more brooding, bigger, taller one. And then Hamish, who's like the gang leader, looks like a total nerd. He's got like Coke glass eyes, I think they said, like, like the Coke bottle, like tops. And then, but he's really short, but he's like pretty brutal. And he just wishes like Mungo could like grow up and be more of a man. And they have their sister Jodie, who she's desperate to get out of this, what's called a council estate we would know in the States as a housing project. And or the scheme, as they say, instead of the council estate. And Jodie is desperate to just go, be in Glasgow, but just go to the University of Glasgow and have a whole new life, because she's trying to get away from, the circumstances that unfortunately she's a part of, that a lot of people were part of, not necessarily because a parent might have been drug or alcohol addled, but going back to my comment about post-Thatcher times and Shuggie being the previous book, they're not a series, but they happen within the same world.
Yeah.
That was more in the 80s, so that was during Thatcher's premiership. And there's some good things Mrs. T did, some things not so much in particular. And this was a thing that happened everywhere, happened in the States, happened in other countries. Everything was outsourced to China. That left all these men who didn't have a college education, maybe they didn't even have their high school education, whatever the equivalent is in the UK, forget what that is. And they went to work to factories and industries that then got shut down, and they were left with nothing except, a government paycheck that potentially then went to the bar, and that was their solace, because they were made, it's horrible to say this, but they were made almost useless to society, because what they had done, the certain occupations were no longer occupied.
Right.
The factories all shut down, and now these men would turn to things like that. And there's a particular scene where the neighbor across from Mungo and his sister, because Hamish is pretty much not home, and their mother, who they call Moma, because she doesn't want to be called Mum or Mummy, because then that makes her sound old. She's very particular about that, because she was a young mother, so she doesn't like, appearing like a mother. But anyways, the neighbor across the way, her husband kind of gives a bit of a tussle to her, and the children believe it has to do with, a big other factor is like who you root for football and rugby wise based on your religion. We'll get to that in a bit. And so his particular football team or whatever lost, and then his wife deals with the repercussions, and the children were like, oh, is it because like he lost the football match, like his team? And she's like, it's not just about that. And she's like, it's more than that, because he was probably drinking, and then his football team loses, and that's like one thing he has to hold on to is this support, because as we know, like we have American football, and people are very passionate about their teams, and then you have like the British soccer, and they're very passionate there throughout the whole of the UK. And so when he's got nothing going for him, he's not really working, this and that, his life has been taken from him, this one last thing to hold on to. And people are passionate for their own reasons, and well deserved to be passionate about sports. When you lose, and then this one positive thing, it's very interesting that then the other people around you have to also become collateral damage because of what your life has become. And it's sad that like all my choices are very sad.
It's all good, man.
But
most impactful.
Yes, it's very impactful. It leaves you with things like, I didn't know these things. And so like to my point about like the religious complex, people are aware of the Troubles, which was in Northern Ireland, and a lot of people will initially think that it was a Catholic and Protestant struggle, and that was part of it, but that's not what the Troubles should be known for, especially because that was just like class warfare across everywhere. We saw it in Europe and so many other times and across the world itself, and still happening to this day in other countries and nations. And that was apparently prevalent in Glasgow as well. So like Hamish, the older brother, is the gang leader for basically the Protestants, and then you have the Catholics on the other side. And so it's really interesting how that, they're Protestant in this one. Because like the author goes between like the main characters, different ones, like which religions they are.
Yeah.
But anyways, and so that's another interesting factor that I didn't know. I knew about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, but it was a sort of a thing underlying in Glasgow. And so this becomes a problem when Mungo, who really doesn't have any friends, befriends the kid James on the other side of this scheme. It turns from a friendship, turns into something a little bit more. They're very lost souls. James's father works up in an oil rig. He's gone from home every other 2 weeks. He's very lonely. He's lost his mother. But James is Catholic. And basically, even being friends with a person of a different religion, that was a no-no. And so Mungo is in this world just like everyone who's trying to get out, but they can't because of the circumstances that have kept them clamped down.
Right.
And then he meets this one friend, but they can't be friends. They can't be anything more than that. And because he's got this brother who's just clamped down on him about like, and he's the gang leader. And like, it's like Mungo's, it's a little bit of that Romeo-Juliet complex of like, Romeo has to be Romeo and Juliet has to be Juliet.
Yes.
And they can't,
right.
be together. So it's a very interesting story. It deals with, talks on masculinity, gangs, alcoholism, different prejudices. And it's really, it's impactful. And the author, the fact that it's his second book and that he's able to write things that are clearly pulled from his own personal life. It's really interesting to see that. And I thought it was brilliant. Also, the reason I don't always suggest his work is not because of the subject matters, but when the characters talk, he writes it in a Glaswegian dialect. So words don't make sense.
Yeah, right.
So like when someone says to, it might say the, because that's how they're pronouncing to.
Right.
It's very interesting. It's done well. I mean, I don't have an accent. I'm not Scottish. But you recognize it for what it is, and it's like, okay, this is very particular.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And so this is a book I really liked. And actually, on BookTube, there was this one guy, Jack Edwards, who suggested, if you enjoyed this book, there's another book. And this book I would suggest, because I had actually read it too. It's called Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver.
Okay.
And it's very different. It takes place in Appalachia, America. But the same idea about like alcoholism and drugs and the effects it has on those that take them and those that love them and are trying to help them. This revolves the underlying story that's happening behind the scenes and that then comes to the foreground in Demon Copperhead much later. And it's very much based off of David Copperfield's, like the Charles Dickinson story. This, though, the underlying is the opioid crisis and how, like, Appalachian America was decimated. These people who had nothing, money, jobs, this and that, land, but then they fell into the opioid crisis of going to these quack doctors who would just prescribe, and they became addicted.
Yep.
And this is a kid, Demon, and another one, kind of like Sam Hell. This kid looks demon-like, and that's where he gets his nickname from, even though his name is Damon. And he has a go at life that was pretty tough, and then he's on the uphill, but then it's tough to keep yourself on that straight and narrow when everyone else around you is just falling apart.
Yeah.
And that one it's good. It actually won the Pulitzer last fall.
Really?
So for fiction. So that was very good for that author, Barbara Kingsolver. And yeah, it's good. Another one's like 500 pages. That one's a bit more digestible than Mungo, also because they're not talking in accents.
Right.
And it's an American story, so I think people might really
I would be interested in that one as well.
It's very interesting, yeah. I mean, he goes from being like, the kid in the trailer park to the hotshot football athlete in high school to dropping out to trying to find his way back.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
The roller coaster of life. That's what it sounds like right there.
Yeah.
And the one you mentioned before too it seems to be packed in with a lot of different factors.
And it's back to oh, sorry to cut you off, but it's kind of like what I said with my number 5 pick, Vanishing Half, where it's like there's all these historical contexts happening, and they're interwoven, and it's not thrown in your face too much. They are happening because they are naturally happening,
right? And
it's more about the characters and their inner relations, like with Mungo and his mother, and with his sister and his brother, and then his friend and neighbor, and with everyone. And so I like that when you can have your historical context and it's not historical fiction, because I think historical fiction people instantly draw to conclusions of, it's another World War II book. But I think when you can add a little bit of accuracy to your story and reality and ground it in reality, it makes it that much more impactful.
When you ground it in reality, even a little bit, it's more relatable in that sense, right? But also, like, when things happen, like, things repeat and whatnot in a sense. And like, say a war happens in a book.
Yep.
So obviously, like, some of the stuff that happens in that book, some of it's gonna be a lot similar to like what actually happened in like our wars and everything. Like,
Absolutely.
War is war, stuff like that. Love is love. Hate is hate. All that stuff. Like, that's what it is.
And the human connection. That's, I mean, obviously now everyone has known by now for the recording. I work in publishing, but that's why I still feel like books have a part to play in like society, and like there is an importance to them. Not only can they then be made into adaptations that then might encourage people to read them, but like where they start from, or where that author got that idea from.
Exactly.
Is it a personal experience? Is it experience they know from someone else? Because authors will write things about a relative from the past, and it's like the story is loosely based off that particular relative.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And that's great. It's like a nice outlet in that sense for the author, more specifically too.
Yeah.
And people that could relate to it,
right?
To the character or the situation or anything of that nature.
Absolutely,
I love that. Yeah.
And I'll do my number 2. I'll be brief. It's another little bit of that, like, it's not a historical fiction, but it has its time and place. Another more recent one. I thought it came out a little later that year. I didn't read it till the summer, and I actually read it within like 2 days.
Wow.
It came out February 6, 2020. It was a debut novel. It, apparently, to my knowledge, what I read online, but I think it was Wikipedia I read it from, so take it from grain of salt. But I believe it, because I think I heard it on BookTube too. But anyways, it's called Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jodorowsky. He's a Polish-born author. I think he's based in Paris now. And for a disclaimer, and a lot of people talked about this online when I was doing my research, which I totally agreed with and forgot. This book was immediately, by the Oprah magazine, compared to Call Me By Your Name, which was the very famous Timothée Chalamet film.
Oh, yeah, right.
Which really popped him off with Armie Hammer, who now has kind of gone away from Hollywood for certain reasons, and we don't know if they're true or not.
Right,
I say that for legal reasons.
It's true.
And a lot of people online said that was a disservice because, and I didn't read that book till way after the movie. The movie was good, Call Me By Your Name. The book was not. And so, in a way, for people who are just book readers, community readers, and when you're comparing the book to that, this new book that's, a debut, it may have not gotten the attention it could have because a lot of people didn't like that other book's, the original book.
Right.
Because it was very dry, very boring. Timothée Chalamet's character, Elio, in the book is very annoying at times.
Yeah.
And he's a teenager, so it's kind of like with Game of Thrones. When you read Sansa, people get annoyed with her, but it's like, she's a teenage girl. What do you expect?
Right.
But that Call Me By Your Name, the book, a lot of people have strong opinions. So for this book, and I also felt like it was a cheap shot at that because that book takes place in the 70s. This book, Swimming in the Dark, takes place in the 80s. Back to the historical aspect, it's 1980 in Poland, and so for anyone that's paying attention, that was still the Soviet regime of the Cold War. So Poland is still occupied by the Kremlin and out in Russia and everything, and so are many other countries. And that was an issue. Yeah. And, the socialistic society enforced upon them, and that plays a huge part into this story. So you have your main character, Ludwig, and you start with his backstory, growing up with just his mother and his grandmother, and, another story about, trying to find his way in the world. He goes on to college. Basically, he majors in, English writing sort of degree, wants to do that sort of thing, research. And that's what he ends up doing post-grad, but not after he has to do an agricultural camp, which is enforced by the government because of the regime going on. So Ludwig and all his classmates have to go to this camp for a part of the summer, and they're basically working as farmhands. And there he meets a classmate he'd never met before, Janos, and they have a sort of friendship and bond over books. And then after the agriculture camp part, they decide to go on a little camping trip themselves. The friendship turns to a little something more, but then they both move back to Warsaw to start their, civilian lives. Ludwig gets his job in research, and Janos goes into basically a political career, working within the government ministry. Now, keep in mind, obviously, the government ministry is controlled by Russia, the Soviet regime.
Right.
And you have a country like Poland that had its own history, and now is being dictated by this other country. And I don't want to get too particular for other people's opinions. But, for people who know the history of that, what were the costs of living, the cost of groceries, could you get a doctor's appointment, this and that. All these little factors come into the foreground, and Ludwig becomes a parent of them more than ever. In one particular case, his host mother is sick, and he can't get her a doctor appointment because the doctor is not coming for 10 days. And he can barely get her any sort of penicillin, this and that stuff.
Right.
And there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Because that's how it was back then, during that time. And then you have Janos, who now what was romance is flitting back and forth, but also tearing at the seams because Ludwig cannot understand how him and all these other classmates, who are more of Janos' friends, associate with the government and what they're just doing to everyone else. But in Janos' opinion, because he was like the fifth son of a farmer, he's never going to own the farm. He has no way in life. This is his only way to make a career. And so he's going to seize the opportunity, even if that means he's allowing people, the everyday man, to suffer. And this is something that causes a strain. And other friends of Ludwig's are in the same beliefs. And then there's these protests and riots that happened. And then you have the government saying, oh, no, that's not what's happening. And obviously, it was very obvious when you couldn't get a grocery or something or a doctor's appointment.
Right.
And so it starts to fracture. And Ludwig starts to realize, I had a tough life, growing up, and we had little means. And that's okay. I don't think I can sell my soul just to get ahead and to have this nice house and get the groceries whenever I want to get because then when he is able to get like medicine, I think for his host mother, he gets it through his connections begrudgingly because she's like basically very ill, but he knows if he asks one of them, they can get it for him. And there's like that double-edged sword again of like, I don't want to do this, but I want to keep her alive.
Right.
And it was sad that this was like things going on, and that's why you had a lot of people fleeing communism and socialism and all that.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that like, yeah, you could have this romantic story, and you could have this very coming-of-age story, but then the undertone of the historical aspect that sets the rest of the stage of why things don't work out, and then eventually, to spoil, Ludwig flees to America. Because he feels he has no choice. And this is all told in like a flashback, the story. He's already in Greenpoint, which is ironic because like having gone to school in Brooklyn, Greenpoint was very Polish. And he is Polish, the main character. But yeah, so it's interesting how the historical aspects can play into the story and just elevate a little bit more. And that's what left it with me. I read it within 2 days. I wouldn't call it a novella, but it is very short. It's like 200-something pages.
Yeah.
And, it could have stood out a little bit more, I think, because it came out in 2020. That's an issue. Pandemic happened, and people were reading, but they weren't reading everything that was out there.
Right.
But it's a good one. It's one I would enjoy to maybe take my time and reread again. But, again, it's one of those where there's a historical underlying, theme to it that I just appreciate. And, again, like we said, it just grounds the story.
Very nice. Okay. I don't even need to read my number one.
Are you sure?
Well, no, I mean, I don't even need to see it on my list.
Okay.
Right there. It's a series of unfortunate events. All
right.
It's the only book series that I, fully read through.
Yep.
To quickly mention the movie aspect of it with Jim Carrey, one of my all-time favorite actors, killed it as Count Olaf. The movie was pretty good too. I wish they made more to continue the actual book series, but I think where they left it off at the third one was the miserable. No, the fourth one. It's the fourth book. That's the Miserable Mill. You see them going to the mill at the end of the movie and whatnot. But anyway, no, the series is great by Lemony Snicket. I'm pretty sure that's not even his real name. I don't know what his real name is.
Yep.
A lot of authors did that. I don't know if they still do that.
Pen names and stuff.
Pen names, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He made 13 of those books.
Yeah.
And I thought they were all fantastic. The last one was a pretty satisfying ending, but satisfying in the sense that that series was always a mystery.
Yep.
And it ended in the sense of a mystery.
Right.
So to spoil it a little bit, Count Olaf dies. I forgot exactly where they were. I think they were on some sort of beach or something like that. They were stranded on an island. And, the Baudelaire siblings, they went off on the boat. And they went off on a boat, leaving the dead Count Olaf. There was a big book that came out afterwards, not too long after the end. It was called, I think it was called the Beatrice Letters.
Okay.
And it showed, it gave clues of where the Baudelaire siblings went at the end.
Love that.
I think they died in a shipwreck.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't love that then. Wow.
I'm gonna have to. I'll look it up later and send you a picture of what I'm talking about that makes me think that. I'll even put it on the video itself.
Right. Yeah.
But for those of you that don't know what a series of unfortunate events is, and I did just spoil most of it. But anyway, it's about these 3 kids, Violet, Claus, and I forgot the baby's name.
Oh, yeah.
But the baby loved to chew everything.
Yep.
Oh, that's gonna bother me. Anyway, those 3 had their parents who died in a house fire, a mansion fire, really very wealthy family and everything like that. Count Olaf steps in as this supposed uncle, I believe, and wants to bring in the children to inherit the money.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes off on like that, the let's call them child services right now.
Yeah.
But they deemed Count Olaf not worthy of taking care of him, bring him to another caregiver, to another caregiver, to another caregiver, only for Count Olaf to fuck it all up.
Yeah.
And it was it really was, it was very entertaining for me, and very, it was mysterious, but also very simple at the same time, in my opinion. And I think that's why I enjoyed it back in the day.
Yeah.
And they had that TV show with who played Olaf, the guy from How I Met Your Mother,
Neil Patrick Harris.
Neil Patrick Harris.
Yeah.
I watched a couple of episodes of that first season. It wasn't for me.
Yep. I never watched the TV series. I saw the movie.
Yeah, right. Well, the movie I thought was great.
Yeah.
Because of Jim Carrey, primarily.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was also part of it why I didn't keep watching it. It wasn't Jim Carrey.
Right.
But that's not saying Neil Patrick Harris did a bad job at all. I thought he did well as Olaf. He looked the part, definitely, for sure, too.
And they're such different actors.
Well, without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt. I think they had 2 very good picks as Olaf so far.
Right.
I kind of hope they don't... I do hope they continue making more renditions of Series of Unfortunate Events in media. Just to keep it alive in a sense, because to me that is like the classic children's book series.
Yeah.
That isn't necessarily treated as like a joke, like say a Diary of a Wimpy Kid or a Captain Underpants.
Oh, okay, that's what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Funny,
for
goofy.
Yeah, right. Like it's more of a serious toned series in that sense, and I think that's also, and it was dark, man. It was dark. It was so cool to read something like that when you're that young. It's like, am I supposed to be reading this sort of deal? You know what I mean?
How many of them are 13?
13. Okay, and he purposely ended at 13 because 13 is like the unlucky number, and everything
genius.
Like that. Yeah, it is genius. Yeah. It is genius. The last one was called The End. Just The End.
Oh, okay. I couldn't remember if it was like The Very End or The Bad End or something.
The Bad Beginning was the very first one. Yeah. Okay. And then it was just called The End, the last one. And I remember the book art. It was, they had to have been on an island or something in that last one because it was the 3 of them, the 3 kids, in the water or the ocean or something, looking at a dead body on the floor. And the dead body, you only see the foot with the eye tattoo on the ankle. For Olaf.
I do remember that bit. That was his signature.
Yes. So it was, and what was really important to me, for 13 books, it had to have ended right. It better have ended right.
Yeah.
And it did, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. It's with a series, you gotta stick that landing.
You gotta stick that landing. I also think that you kind of gotta know your ending probably after crafting the first book in a franchise, in my opinion.
Right.
Sure, you could change some things as your story progresses and things make a little bit more sense as time goes on.
Right.
But I think you ultimately need to have a beginning and end game plan. Because if you're just making it up on the go, sure, you might get lucky and it does end up great. But I think maybe 7-8 times out of 10, it's not going to happen.
Well, it's
in my opinion.
No, it's that, I don't know if you've heard of it, and I think George R.R. Martin's the one who's talked about it more. And there's that gardener versus architect complex. Oh. So someone like Lemony Snicket, J.K. Rowling, I would imagine Tolkien too, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
They have the architectural frame, They know the start and the end and certain things that have to happen in between to get from A to Z.
Yeah.
And then they can flourish here and there in between. Like, you could have these other little small plots. Then you got someone like George R. R. Martin, who is a self-avowed gardener. He'll plant this one thing. He'll see what grows. Oh, this happens over here. What if this comes to here? That whole sort of thing. And yeah, it's like he's talked about it before, and he's been called out for it before because he's so busy gardening that it's overgrown.
Yeah.
Whereas the on the opposite side, being the architect versus the gardener, everything's more contained.
Without a doubt. And
structure.
It makes it the structure, it makes it more organized and everything. Mm-hmm. I think a reader would enjoy that more because they would understand it more. But I also don't see the problem with the gardening idea either at all.
Absolutely.
Because in reality of it, if you're
it.
creating a whole world,
Yeah.
of course a million different things are going to be happening.
Yeah.
Of course there is.
And you kind of have to let it flourish. Like, I never saw the Tolkien movie, but I remember the one clip where he's with his then eventual wife, and he's coming up with something, and she says, oh, this is a character, and she's going off with an idea. He says, that's not a character, that's a place. And then his mind goes and goes about, no, so that's that. And then that can be a garden, but then in that garden, there is still, you can have like spokes and frames to let the things grow.
Right.
So I am not against the gardening. I just think George is taking advantage of it. So.
Well, yes, that is maybe. Well, I think the two downsides is that it could be overcrowded, and then the other thing is that taking advantage.
Yeah.
As far as, all right, you know what, we're gonna throw this here, see if it becomes popular. If it does, yeah, we'll keep it going. If not, then we'll just forget about it. But then you'll have your diehard fans who's like, wait, but what happened with this one thing?
Yeah.
Why was it even brought up in the first place?
Absolutely.
You know, there had to, like, they're probably thinking in their mind, like, there had to be some sort of purpose to this, you
Yes.
know? Like, you know, exactly.
And plot holes.
Yeah, exactly what I'm talking about.
It's never fun.
No,
Oh,
it is not.
I really should. I don't know if I definitely did not read all of the series Unfortunate books. I wonder if I can find them somewhere I can read them. That'd be good.
Dude, I
rack
have
up my read count for the year
Yeah.
easily.
Oh yeah,
13 real quick.
Yeah.
I'll be ahead of my goal. I can then read some longer ones too, so they can balance it out.
Yeah, right.
And nothing wrong with a short book.
Oh no.
As we said, it has to be impactful.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But that is my number one. It's a series that'll
Great,
always
yeah.
remember.
Good.
Yeah.
No, we've got a series in there, which is good.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think most of mine were series.
Captain Under.
Well, definitely honorable mentions.
Yes, I mentioned. Yeah.
But definitely most of those were the series. I think the only ones from my actual top 5 were Game of Thrones and series of unfortunate events. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Alrighty. Well, my number one.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear this.
Well, we're not choosing something. I shouldn't say I haven't recently read it. I have recently reread it now.
Okay.
For an X number of time. And I am moving into school mode too. My number one book, and since I was 16 and still to this day, is published July 16th, 1951, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger.
Wow.
A lot of people are shocked when I say that. Like a friend of the podcast and a friend of mine, Dan Mattia, who's been on, I remember telling him about it. Maybe it was only last summer when I mentioned, like, that is my favorite book of all time. And I know when we initially were discussing, like, what books we were doing in our top 5 from childhood to high school or do we do it in general.
Yeah.
I remember then talking to Dan about it and saying, and he's like, well, your number one's always going to be the same though, right? And I said, yeah. And that's read it at 16, and then I read it again for the first time in 10 years in beginning of 2021 at 26. And now I read it January in school, read it in January in 2021, and now since 2021 I've read it every January as like a tradition.
Wow.
So I reread it. I mean, it's not a long book. I forgot. It's like 200 something pages.
Oh, okay.
And it's doable. But I mean, it's doable for me. I know a lot of people hate Holden, and there's a lot of
I can see why.
People get annoyed with him. He does repeat himself a lot, as people probably tell from the podcast. I'm a bit of a repeater myself. And but there's, I don't know, it's an interesting thing because a lot of my friends, in particular, were always shocked and still shocked when I say this is his favorite book, because I, especially at 16, 17, he's 17 in this book, Holden Caulfield, our protagonist. And so we were 16 when we read this. I was nothing like Holden at all. Like how his attitude was, he was a bit more open about his opinions on things.
Without a doubt.
I was a very quiet person. Everyone can attest to that. I will be the first to admit that. But there was something inside his character that as I've gotten older and now reread it, that I'm like, yeah, this is why I enjoyed it. Because he was just like, again, going to the whole thing about teenagers being teenagers, like teenage angst, except it wasn't written out in this, I don't know. I think, how do I put this? It was done in a way that it was like subtle. And like you kind of had to get through the story to realize, oh, he has issues. And it's really at the core of it, he's just very upset. And that was something that, as a teenager, everyone can feel that way.
Yeah.
But there was this one quote that I got, and it's another quote I'll read out. But I've got all the quotes from the books that I love, but this one quote in particular, which really put into perspective, this is why this is my favorite book. And I had sent it to Dan, actually, too, last summer. It was from an article that my dad got through, like, the Morning Brew or something, and he sent it to me over email. And, it was the top 100 books of all time. And usually I'm like, oh, these are going to be so subjective, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And I'm going through the list, and I'm like, oh, they actually have some decent ones. And then I get to, I think it was, like, number 60, and it was Catcher. And the quote in particular, like, little small blurbs. And so it said, originally meant for an adult audience, The Catcher in the Rye has become a favorite among adolescent readers and high school literature teachers. The theme of teenage angst and alienation imbue a story of rebellion as the protagonist, Holden Caulfield, looks for acceptance, recognition, and appreciation. Like so many teenagers, Caulfield finds himself facing the decision to leave everything behind, only to face the realization that perhaps his life isn't as dreadful as it seems. And that complex parallel of a teenager to even as an adult, where sometimes we can all get so aggravated with life.
Of course, like the world's ending.
Like the world's ending, yeah. We act like a teenager without outwardly maybe acting like one, but we get internal this and that and think, oh, this is so awful, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Then you can take a step back. And I know I've had that on and off, in recent time even too, where I have to say, like, but maybe things aren't as bad if I just take a deep breath and realize, there are the positives around me. But it is my favorite book, even though I know he's an alienating character. I know this is a book that has been considered banned in certain states and schools.
Oh, yeah, I did hear that, too.
So, which I'm like, well, like, it's like he swears because there's that prostitute moment. Like, I don't know. It's like, it's interesting. We won't get into that at all.
Yeah, we could talk about that for a while, though. Yeah,
but, and then, but this book has always stayed with me. And when I did the reread 10 years later, I was like, let's see if it really is my favorite book. Like, let me really see. And I was into it. And there have been times, like, certain scenes where, like, I get teary-eyed about certain things, and, like, because it's just, like, that impactful. And I think I read it as a teenager, and now I reread it as an adult, and it still, like, holds something in me.
Yeah.
But this is, so I'm joining you in the schooling youth band.
Very nice.
My number one, and,
so even better every time you read it, it's or always the same feel? Are you picking up more notes as you keep on reading it and whatnot? Is that how it's going?
Definitely picking up things that I maybe... Obviously, I know the gist of the plot.
Of course.
I can't spit the whole book out, though.
Right.
I mean, I took piano like most people as kids, and I could never memorize, like, a song. So, like, to memorize a whole book, that ain't happening.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, with age, even when I know what's coming next. And this past years, I was more like, okay, I know this is coming next and next. But it wasn't like okay, I'm bored, let's get through it. It was like a appreciation.
Yeah.
Like the conversations between Holden and his sister Phoebe. Like this time around, I had more of an appreciation between that relationship than maybe past times. There were, in the other previous years of my rereading of it, there's like that one scene in particular where he's like at the bar and he's a little drunk, and then he's having this moment where a lot of authors back in those times for post World War I, or in this case post World War II, they write certain scenes that are reminiscent of like wartime. Mm-hmm. And so in that case with Holden, he's like acting like he's been stabbed or shot, and he's having like this like hallucination, and it's this very like emotional thing, and like he's like, because he's been drinking this and that, and he doesn't really know where he's going, and he's trying to figure it out. And he ends up on the like basically like going through the streets that night before he goes to his sister. But yeah, it's like each little time there's something new, we'll say, that stays with me from that reread.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's my favorite, and I know it's polarizing to some people, but it's going to take a lot for any book to probably knock it off number one.
Wow. All right.
It's pretty bold of me to say, I'm sure, but I don't know. It's always, and I didn't like that. That was American literature. I enjoyed American literature. I remember my teacher in particular, we started with the two plays, Crucible, Caesar, and then we did Transcendentalism, which can be a lot when you're going through Whitman, Thoreau, and all of them.
Yeah.
And Dickinson, I suppose. And then we came back from winter break, I think, and this is when we read this, and I was like, oh, I vibe with this. We hadn't read Gatsby yet. We hadn't read Of Mice and Men or any others. And no one had really talked about this one yet, if anyone had read it in their English classes. So, like, I kind of went in cold.
Right.
Hadn't asked my older sister or anything, and it really became... I think that could be why I enjoyed it so much, because it was, like, my own thing.
Right.
So, yeah.
It was the unexpected experience of it.
Yes. Yeah. Unexpected. Yeah. Didn't know anything. What was coming. Enjoyed it. I think I did well on the test, which probably made my teacher wonder, did he cheat? But no. I enjoyed it that much that I retained the story itself.
Right.
But yeah, that's my number one.
Very good. Well, I think we both had clearly very different lists, but I think in a very good way.
Yeah. We had a good dialogue about it.
Yeah, without a doubt. I wish I had more books on my list that almost like to recommend you to read. Besides series, you said you might reread that.
No, I mean, hey, you know what? There's no shame in that. Like, when I was thinking of, like, I could throw in things like, to be honest, I was the kid in first grade who was pulled out for extra help for reading. So it doesn't matter, but then I credit, my babysitter, one of our babysitters from growing up we had for a very long time. I had read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then we read it again in 5th grade as a class. And I'd already read it a few years before. And then she's like, well, why don't you read the rest of the series? You have the books. I got them for you guys. And I did. And so that was, like, definitely encouraging. But then I've read the Percy Jackson series when I was 24 and really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I have not watched the series yet. Maybe at some
point.
Heard
it's very good.
I heard it was very good. And again, back to that whole faithful adaptation that the movie versions weren't as great, but now this new series, Rick Riordan's very on board, so that's a good thing.
Yes.
And, but yeah, I was, not always the biggest reader, and then it took, one particular series, but then, I'm open to reading any sort of book. Like I said, I'm trying to be good about nonfiction. It's not the easiest, but yeah, I gotta check out Series of Fortunate Events. And if I find any books that are less dark and less long, I can throw them your way.
Well, no, I'll be honest with you. I think there was like 3 of them on there that I said I was like I would definitely be interested in checking it out. And when I rewatch this and yes, when I rewatch this and figure out which ones those were there, I'm gonna text you and be like, this is one of them that I'm probably gonna have to get my hands on.
Okay,
for sure.
Yeah. No, yeah. I definitely. It was interesting when you said where the red fern grows. I was not. Yeah. I didn't remember that one, but yeah, that was a tough one.
That was a tough one. Just once again, but just with the dogs, man.
Yeah, like we should have known because that's what happens with dogs.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you think maybe once, maybe once. But yeah.
Kyle, thank you so much for joining the episode today. I had a blast. I learned a lot with a lot of these stories and everything like that you brought up. I knew you were a good choice for this episode for sure.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, listen, maybe we'll do that episode one day, the adaptation one. We played around talking about that a little bit on this one, but we'll get more serious with it on that episode there. Would you want to let the people know where they could find you on the gram or anything like that?
Yes, you can find me on the gram if you really want to. It's official Kyle OB, and I occasionally post. I occasionally post the books I work on. I occasionally post the things I do, but I'm not always posting on social media, but you can find me there for sure.
Very good. Yeah. And for us, you can find this. Oh wait, this camera actually had a die on me. Oh yeah, nice 213.
Gosh,
I think we broke a record with it.
That's my fault.
No, that's fine. That's fine. They can listen to me here. So listen, guys, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and also follow us on all social media platforms at Frank_videos. You could also listen to this episode audio only version on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. So make sure to check us out there too. Kyle, thank you once again.
Thank you
for joining the pod.
Thank you.
And for you guys at home, have a wonderful night and peace out. It's too late to add something else. Huh?
No, what else did you want to add?
Steak.
No, yeah, steak is fine.
I'm good with that.
I'm fine with that.
Honestly, that addition.
Take it! No! No! Take it! Take it! Please take it! Please take it!
Please take it! I'm looking at dinner mains and I'm like, There's not a
No,
clear,
yes.
winner
Please,
here.
please
So
take it.
thank you, Frank.
You have to take it. You
I
have
should
to.
have waited
Yes!
to say that when it was
Yes!
my
Yes!
turn.
No, I would have
waited.
vetoed it if you had done it there. Not vetoing it
You
here.
know, Frank, I'm gonna lock in
Perfect.
state.
That is amazing.
How do
That
we
is
You're
not,
quite
amazing.
man?
fucking welcome.
Oh my God! Wow,
Appreciate
Frank
you.
with the absolute punt of the century
All
right
right,
there.
all right.
Damn. All right. Well, listen. Time to recover, Frank.
Yeah.
Dinner is my favorite and my most important meal
Okay.
of the day. Salmon.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, salmon is the main.
Okay.
pick,
Good
Yeah.
pick.